Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere most people wouldn't survive 5 minutes. The raw endless frontier of early America. No phones, no GPS, no Uber Eats if you get peckish. Just you, the wilderness, and whatever tools you can carry, or make from sticks and sheer panic. It's muddy, it's cold, there's probably a cougar nearby, and, honestly, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I drop these sleepy deep divers every night, so if you're into history with a side of survival terror and campfire coziness, you'll fit right in. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to cold dew on your blanket, not a warm comforter, an actual wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke and something you'd rather not name. The fire has died down to ghost glow embers, and your breath curls in the air like smoke from a pipe. You're not dreaming, you're out here, and today you're going deeper. Behind you is the last outpost of anything remotely resembling civilization, a crooked wooden shack that sold you salt pork and a dull hatchet. Ahead is a mapeless stretch of wild. You take your first steps into it like crossing through a veil. Your boots sink a little into mud, twigs snap underfoot, and something rustles in a bush just far enough away that you can pretend it wasn't a predator. This is what they called heading west. Not a gentle road trip with trail mix and playlists. This is the blank space on the map where men vanished or became legends. And there's no welcome party waiting for you. Your first rite of passage, letting the land chew on you a little. The early frontiersmen understood something we've mostly forgotten. The land has a rhythm. It breathes. It listens. If you stomp around like you own the place, it will remind you otherwise. Fast. So instead, you start by watching, you crouch, you wait. You look for signs, not just tracks or feathers, but things like how the mist gathers in low ground, or how birds behave when a predator is nearby. You don't talk, you don't whistle, you let the forest introduce itself. The first full day in the wild is a silent negotiation between you and everything that lives here. You're not the apex predator. You're not even middle of the food chain. You're the new guy who smells weird, walks loud and doesn't know where the latrine is. But you try, you walk lightly, you learn not to snap every twig underfoot. You keep an eye on the sun, a mental compass ticking quietly in your skull. You listen to birds. Blue jays scream when they see something they don't like. Maybe you. Or maybe something worse. Historically, this phase was life or death. Many early settlers died not from war or hunger, but from disorientation. People wandered a mile from camp, got turned around and disappeared forever. That fear hums in your blood now. You force yourself to mark trees with your knife as you walk, the blade making a soft whisper across bark. You look back often, tracing your steps like breadcrumbs in reverse. And yet, something stirs inside you. Beneath the panic and the creeping feeling that you've lost your mind, there's a flicker of thrill. You're touching something primal, something buried under 1,000 layers of modern comfort. There's a historical nugget for you. Early fur trappers, like the famous Jedediah Smith, were often religious men who still described the wilderness as a holy place. Terrifying, yes, but also sacred. Smith once survived a bear attack that nearly tore off his face, only to patch himself up and keep exploring. Why? Maybe because the danger made life taste sharper. You're beginning to understand that now, as the light begins to dim, and out here, twilight hits like a curtain drop. You scramble to make camp. No fancy tent. No folding chair, just a patch of dry leaves under a pine and whatever cover you can make with your cloak and a bit of tied-off canvas. You nestle into the debris like an animal. Everything smells like sap, moss, and nervous sweat. And then, the night sounds begin. There's a fringe historical detail that makes your skin crawl. Some frontiersmen reported hearing singing deep in the woods, not from people, but from the land itself. Low, warbling sounds in the distance. Was it wind through canyons? Tree limbs rubbing together? Or something less explainable? You don't know, but you hear it too, some strange howl carried on the breeze. It doesn't help your confidence. What you do know is that you're not sleeping well tonight. Every crack of a twig feels like a threat. Your hand rests on your knife's hilt, the blade still stained with sap from marking trees. And here's something historians still debate. Did most settlers who disappeared into the frontier die, or did they just give in to it? Some theorize that not all who vanished perished. Some integrated into native tribes. Some started new lives deeper in the wild where no sensors could find them. And some might have just stopped wanting to come back. As the stars finally punch through the sky, too bright and too many to count, you curl in tighter, every sound amplified by fear and wonder. You've crossed over now. Whatever comes next, you're not just visiting the frontier, you're part of it. By morning, your spine feels like it's been used as a washboard. The pine needles weren't exactly memory foam, and sometime in the night, a slug decided your left boot was prime real estate. You flick it off with a grimace and sit up slowly, the cold air slipping under your clothes and reminding you that you're still very much in this nightmare-turned historical experience. You survive the first night, barely, but now you're cold, stiff, hungry, and your fingers are going numb. Time for the next lesson. Fire. Now, lighting a fire in the wilderness might sound like Wilderness Skills 101, but you're about to find out how incredibly humbling it can be when the ground's wet. Your hands are shaking and every piece of tinder seems to be plotting against you. There's no lighter, no matches, just a flint, some steel, and your absolute desperation not to freeze again tonight. Your breath is visible, your stomach's hollow, and your patience is, probably already on life support. You start with the basics. You gather bark, dry if you can find it, though dry is a stretch after last night's drizzle. You shred it with your knife, trying to make a fuzzy little bird's nest of fibrous material. Then you look for kindling, twigs, pine needles, and thin, crackable branches that don't feel damp and heavy like sponges. You pile everything carefully in a shallow pit you dig with a stick. Then comes the spark. You strike the steel against the flint, the motion awkward at first. Sparks fly, but they don't land where they should. You try again, then again, and again. Finally, one rebellious spark kisses the shredded bark, and a wisp of smoke curls upward. You lean in, eyes wide, and blow gently. The ember grows just a bit, then fizzles out with the smug finality of a candle in a hurricane. Great. So begins the ancient ritual of grovelling before fire. You repeat the process, trying different techniques, striking harder, softer, changing the angle. A spark catches again, smoke curls, and this time, yes, the bark begins to smoulder. You blow, slow and steady, until a tiny flame licks the edges of your pile like it's waking up from a nap. It spreads, eats a pine needle, crackles, and rises. You just made fire. Real, actual, primal fire. And yeah, it smells like wet moss and anxiety, but it's yours. Here's your historical fact for the night. The flint and steel method, while iconic, wasn't always the first choice. Frontiersmen often carried charcloth, bits of linen burnt in low oxygen to make them catch sparks more easily. And if they didn't have that, some went fully primitive with bow drills, spinning sticks into smoke and blistered palms. You don't even want to try that right now. There's something about fire that changes the way you feel out here. It's not just warmth, it's psychological armour. It creates a boundary between you and everything lurking in the dark. Creatures fear it. Humans gather around it. And without it, you're just meat with a heartbeat. Now that you have it, you feel a little more alive, a little less like a lost tourist in the woods. But let's not get cocky. Your fire's still small and the morning fog hasn't lifted. You feed it carefully, no huge logs yet, just a few thicker sticks to keep the heat rising. Soon the smoke climbs in twisting fingers through the trees, and that scent, wood smoke, just a little acrid, starts to remind you of safety. You use the fire to warm your hands, maybe even toast the edge of that stale biscuit you saved from the outpost. Not exactly a frontier brunch, but it'll keep your stomach from eating itself. If you're lucky, you'll find something better later. Berries maybe, or if you remember how to make a snare, an unlucky rabbit. But for now, you have heat, foodish, and a little bit of light. Now here's your fringe fact for the day. Some frontiersmen believed fire could ward off spirits, not animals, spirits. There were whispers of ghost lights in the woods, or haunted trees that watched you while you slept. Lighting a fire wasn't just about survival, it was a way of claiming your space, like saying, hey creepy forest entities, I'm here, and I bite back. You don't really believe in that stuff, but tonight, when the wind moans through the trees, you might light 2 fires, just in case. But let's address a hot debate that's still ongoing in historical circles. Just how often did our frontiersmen make fire this way? versus relying on coals carried from place to place. Some argue that many didn't strike fresh sparks every night. Instead, they'd bury coals in ash to keep them warm for hours, even days, then revive them later with fresh tinder. Efficient, smart, and way less frustrating than what you just went through. Of course, if you got rained on or tripped and dumped your fire bundle in a stream, well, back to square one with the flint and your sanity. Now the fire's stable. The warmth sinks into your bones, steam rising off your damp sleeves. You realise you haven't really sat still since yesterday. So you do. You sit and breathe and just listen. The forest sounds different when you're not panicking. Birds flutter, squirrels chirp like angry little goblins, a woodpecker taps somewhere far off, a rhythmic knock that echoes through the trees. It's almost musical, almost peaceful, until something large crunches a branch in the distance and sends your heart straight into your throat. You glance at your fire, still going, good. You grab your hatchet and stand slowly. Maybe it was just a deer, maybe not. Either way, you're ready. You're learning how to read the land now, and when you have fire on your side, you're not quite as invisible, but you're not helpless either. So yeah, you survived the night, you made fire, your biscuit tasted like bark and your knees still ache. But out here, those tiny winds, they mean everything. You kick dirt onto the fire until it hisses, then double check that no ember remains to give you away. Fire is a comfort, sure, but it's also a beacon, and sometimes you don't want to be seen. With the forest still hushed in morning light, you shoulder your pack and start moving again. Deeper into the woods where the trees grow tight and the canopy filters sunlight into dusty green beams. This is where maps become feelings. And today, you're learning to read the land like a language you used to speak in another life. No signs, no trail markers, no friendly park ranger popping out to point the way. Just trees, moss, animal tracks, and the soft crunch of your boots on the leaves. You start noticing the way the terrain shifts underfoot, where roots twist into the path, where water gathers in little dip, where birds go silent for no reason you can see. It's all part of a code, and it's not just for aesthetics. Frontiersmen didn't survive out here by luck. They read the land constantly, visually, audibly, sometimes even through smell. You follow their lead. There's a cluster of bluebird feathers up ahead, sign of a scuffle, maybe a hawk. A broken branch above head height, bent sharply downward. Could be deer, could be a bear scratching its back. You touch it gently, like you're asking permission to keep going. Now here's something early travellers lived and died by. Elevation. You start paying attention to which direction the land tilts. Moving uphill? Good. Drier, less buggy, and better for visibility. Head downhill and you're following the same lines water and predators might take. And if you're really unlucky, you find yourself in what frontiersmen called a Widowmaker Valley. Steep, dark and cold, it's a great place to die lost and miserable. But you're smart, you climb. As you crest a rise, you get your first decent view of the surrounding area. Through a break in the trees, you spot distant hills, maybe even a river, cutting silver across the valley below. You mark that in your head. Water is a life, you'll head that way later. Here's your historical fact. Scouts from fur trading companies in the early 1800s were trained to read animal trails like roads. A narrow path with low overhanging branches and crushed grass likely meant deer. Larger, wider paths dug into the dirt. That's probably a game trail used by bison or elk. Following those trails was safer than bushwhacking through unknown thickets, and it often led to water sources. Today you find one of those trails, soft earth pocked with prints and droppings. You touch the dirt. Still damp. Recent. You follow. And now for something a little on the quirky side, some old-timers claimed they could smell direction. Specifically the presence of humans or animals upwind. Wild pigs, they said, had a grease stink you could detect from yards away. Same went for other frontiersmen. If someone hadn't bathed in a month, and odds are they hadn't, you could sniff them out like a bloodhound. You laugh a little, thinking about that. Maybe it's nonsense. Maybe it's not. But now that your senses are sharpening, you do start to notice the forest has smells. Earthy, musky, green, some parts sweet with wildflowers, others sour and metallic near old fallen trees. Maybe they were onto something. You walk until your legs ache. The path winds down into a soft-bottomed gulch where the air feels heavier. Your ears pop slightly with the change in pressure. You pause. It's quiet. Too quiet. The forest feels different here. And here's where the scholarly debates heat up. Did early explorers and frontiersmen rely more on their own sensory skills or on indigenous guides to navigate these spaces? Many of the most successful expeditions, like Lewis and Clark, relied heavily on native trackers to find passes, avoid hostile territory, and read signs far subtler than a broken twig. Without that help, many would have been hopelessly lost. Some scholars argue that the rugged lone explorer image is more myth than reality, that most survivors had mentors or companions who truly knew the land. Out here, with everything whispering around you, you start to believe it. You pause again at a half-rotted log that's been clawed at. Deep gouges, spaced evenly. Bare. Not huge, but not small either. You step back, careful not to slip. This isn't your turf. You keep going, quieter now, eyes scanning for more signs. Droppings, fur, overturned rocks. You don't need to see the bear. You just need to know where not to be. After another hour, you begin to understand that reading the land isn't some fancy skill. It's survival. It's knowing when the wind changes direction and suddenly your scent is travelling ahead of you. It's recognising when birds take flight in a cluster, not from you, but from something following you. It's learning to walk softer, slower, until your footfalls match the rhythm of the trees swaying above. You catch a faint, high-pitched whistle on the breeze. Not man-made, but avian. A signal. You frisson some freeze. Then you hear it again, farther off. Blue jays, alarm calls, something's moving in the forest ahead. Could be a fox, could be something bigger. You veer off the trail, careful to step between branches instead of on them. You find a low ridge and crouch, listening. Nothing. Still, you mark the direction. You're starting to think like prey and predator, just like the old-timers did. Eventually, the trail curves toward a small clearing with a rock outcropping. You climb it and take in the view again. Hills, trees, the ripple of that river you spotted earlier. You're learning, you're adapting. The forest no longer feels like a green maze. It feels like a slow conversation, and you're finally starting to understand the language. By mid-afternoon, your body is screaming for rest, but your mind is alert, buzzing with every detail you've absorbed. You sit on a mossy boulder, feet throbbing, but spirits strangely high. You made it farther than most tourists would, and you did it by listening to the wind, the ground, and a few very loud birds. Tomorrow you'll follow the river, but tonight you sleep somewhere higher, somewhere the land lets you stay. You wake up to the smell of damp earth and your own breath, curled tight under a crude lean-to made from branches and canvas. Dew clings to the edges of everything. Your blanket is barely dry from last night, and your knees ache like you've been running marathons in your sleep. But your eyes open wide, because now there's one question that matters more than all the others. Where's your water? It's not panic, not yet, but your mouth is dry. The last sip you took was yesterday from a small puddle you filtered through a bandana and blind optimism. That worked for a night, but it won't work now. You need real water, and not the kind that comes with bonus parasites. So you do what the old frontiersmen did. You go looking, but not just blindly following a guess. This is where those half-mystical land-reading skills pay off. You stand, stretch your spine until it pops like old timber, and scan the tree line. Birds chirp, insects buzz, and the wind shifts gently in the canopy above. You listen, not for the words, but for flow, literally. Running water has a sound. If you stand still long enough in absolute stillness, you can sometimes hear it. Faint and distant, like a lullaby you almost remember. You start walking downhill again, not too steep. Just enough to know that gravity is doing half the work. Water always travels to the lowest point, and here, that means a slow descent into a narrow valley that smells vaguely of wet moss and something sweet you can't quite place. Along the way, you check the ground for clues. Damp soil under dry leaves? Good sign. Certain plants, like willows or cattails, only grow near water. You spot some up ahead, peeking through the underbrush like shy cousins. Your pulse quickens. Maybe you're close. And then, there it is. A thin ribbon of stream trickling through rocks and roots. Not a roaring river, but enough to give life. And maybe give you yours back if you're careful. Because here's the thing, just finding water is not enough. You have to know how to drink it without turning your gut into a parasite-petting zoo. Historically, frontiersmen had a few tricks. They'd boil it, sure. If they had fire and time, some dropped hot rocks into water-filled bark containers to sterilize it when they didn't have metal pots. Others would filter it through sand, charcoal and cloth. You're going old school. You strain it first through a layer of fabric, your shirt, because what else are shirts for but questionable survival hacks? Then you boil it in a battered tin cup. Resting it awkwardly on coals you've reignited from last night's stash of embers. It bubbles, you watch, hypnotised by the little rolling dance of steam. The sound is pure magic. That boil is the sound of life coming back into you. You let it cool just enough, then take a careful sip. It tastes earthy, like warm stones and river ghosts, but it's clean, and it's everything. Here's your historical fact. The Lewis and Clark expedition carried several portable soup cakes, basically dehydrated meat broth, to mix with their water for both nutrition and flavour. Water wasn't just about hydration, it was a vehicle for calories, salt and warmth. You don't have any soup cakes, but you do drop in a pine needle or two, letting them steep like some weird forest tea. Vitamin C, a touch of taste, and probably at least 70% placebo comfort. You refill your flask, bury some coals for later, and sit by the stream for a while. The world feels kinder now, less hostile. The sound of trickling water dulls the sharp edges of your nerves. And here's your quirky fringe fact for the day. Some frontiersmen swore that dowsing rods, forked sticks held lightly in the hands, could find underground water. Total superstition? Maybe. Or maybe they were just highly attuned to the landscape in ways we no longer understand. You try it, just for fun, with a Y-shaped twig you find nearby. You wander a bit, holding it out like a sleepy wizard. It bobs slightly when you pass over the stream again. Coincidence? Probably. Still kind of eerie. Now time for a little scholarly debate. Did early settlers and frontiersmen actually know how dangerous untreated water could be? Some historians argue that they did, and that their survival rates were higher than we give them credit for. Others claim that most simply rolled the dice, drank from the nearest stream and hoped for the best. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the muddy middle. Out here, even caution has limits when thirst is screaming louder than reason. You move upstream for a while, checking the area for signs of game or potential ambush spots. The stream cuts through a narrow gorge where the walls close in with jagged rock and thick roots. It's beautiful, in a haunting, almost claustrophobic way. You don't linger. This would be a terrible place to get cornered. Eventually you find a better spot, a little rise where the water pools naturally and flows more slowly. You mark it mentally. This will be your base for now. Water nearby, some cover, decent elevation. All good. And now that your thirst is handled, your brain starts doing that annoying thing again, asking what's next. You lie back in the grass, hands behind your head, and stare at the patches of sky between the trees. The clouds drift by like lazy cattle. The wind rustles branches above in a slow rhythmic hush. And you realise something important. Survival isn't always about running from disaster. Sometimes it's about finding quiet victories. Clean water, a safe place to sit, a warm drink that tastes like forest needles. Tonight, you won't just survive, you'll live, even if it's just for an hour on your own terms. You wake to the sound of something moving just beyond your line of sight. Soft, deliberate, almost like a whisper dragging across fallen leaves. You freeze, breath held, heart suddenly pounding like a drum made from rawhide and nerves. It's early. Maybe dawn, maybe not. Out here, time's just a suggestion. You lie still, barely blinking, and wait. The sound comes again, closer now, and then, as if by cue, you see it. A set of antlers bobbing slowly through the underbrush. A deer, probably a buck judging by the size. It steps into the clearing all twitchy grace and silent judgment, then pauses, as if it knows you're watching. You don't move, you just observe, like you're the forest itself. And here's the thing, in this world, animals aren't just wildlife, they're survival manuals with legs. Every twitch, every sound, every mark they leave behind tells a story, and frontiersmen learned to read those stories like their lives depended on it, because they did. When the deer finally trots off, vanishing as silently as it arrived, you rise slowly and begin your morning. Your muscles ache less now, you feel sharper, more tuned in. Today your goal is simple. Learn to see what most people miss. Tracks, trails, signs left behind by creatures who've been walking these woods long before you stumbled in with a hatchet and an attitude. You start near the stream. Mud is your friend here. It holds prints like soft memory. You spot a few near the edge, cloven hoof prints, sharp-edged and deep. Deer again. You follow them a few paces before they fade into grass, but then there's another print, rounder, wider, with claws pressing in at the tips. Bear. You crouch, studying the size. Not enormous, but big enough that you'd rather not meet it without a wall of fire and maybe a cannon. The track leads away from your camp, which is a relief. For now, this becomes your routine. You move slowly, methodically, scanning the forest floor and low branches. You start to notice patterns, where animals cross the stream, where they dig, where they rub their scent into trees. Even the birds become informants. Jays scream when they're annoyed or afraid, crows gather near potential kills. The whole forest is talking if you can just learn the dialect. Here's your historical fact. Frontiersmen, especially hunters and trappers, often relied on Native American tracking techniques. But tribes like the Shawnee and Sioux used a combination of direct tracking, footprints, scat, broken branches, and what's called sign tracking, subtler clues like displaced stones, disturbed insects, or bent grass blades. It wasn't just about following a trail, it was about building a mental model of what the animal was doing, where it was going, and how long ago it passed. You practice this, slowly forming a story from each print you find. A squirrel here, its tiny paw marks like Morse code in the mud. A raccoon's wandering path circling the water's edge. Even a fox, maybe, those narrow, dog-like prints spaced just far enough apart to suggest something cautious and clever. And then you come across something strange. At first glance, it's just a bent sapling. But then you see the strip of bark missing, peeled away in a deliberate spiral. Above that, a cluster of stones stacked in an odd little pile. Not natural, not animal, human. Your pulse quickens. You crouch, scanning the area. No fresh footprints, just a vague scuff near the base of the tree. Could have been from weeks ago. Could have been yesterday. It's a sign, a marker maybe. A code. Trappers sometimes left them to warn others. Good hunting nearby, or danger. But without knowing the system, it's just a mystery. Here's your fringe fact. Some frontiersmen believed certain signs in the woods weren't made by man or beast, but by something in between. The Stick Indians of Pacific Northwest legend were said to leave twisted branches and rock formations as territorial warnings. Whether myth or metaphor, you can't help but feel watched now. The forest has gone quiet again. You retreat to your camp, ears perked, senses wired, not in panic, just readiness. You scan the edges of the clearing often now, not because you expect something, but because you know better than to assume nothing's out there. And here comes the scholarly debate of the day. Were frontiersmen more attuned to tracking and animal behaviour than modern, indigenous hunters? Or did they simply borrow and adapt those skills over time? Some argue that white settlers glamorized indigenous methods without fully understanding them, while others suggest that generations of frontier living created a hybrid tracking culture that was uniquely North American. You're not sure where the line falls, but you know this: whoever first taught these skills deserved a monument and maybe a hot meal. By midday you found several more tracks, including a full-on trail through the underbrush where multiple animals have passed. It leads toward a patch of berry bushes, some half-eaten, some freshly disturbed. You approach cautiously, mindful of bears, but no signs today, just the sticky red stains of berries and a few helpful thorns that immediately embed themselves in your sleeve. Nature's handshake. You take what you can, some berries, a few mint leaves you recognise from your trail guide, and even a couple of edible mushrooms, you think. You're building not just a map of the terrain, but of the creatures who share it with you. Their movements are like wind currents, shifting, flowing, sometimes predictable, sometimes not, but always meaningful. As the evening approaches, you set up camp again, this time on slightly higher ground with a clear view of two approach paths. You don't light a fire tonight, just in case whoever left that tree sign comes back. Instead, you eat cold, chew slowly, and let the sounds of the forest wrap around you like a blanket. Somewhere in the distance you hear the high-pitched yip of a coyote, then silence, then an owl. You smile. You're learning the language. The morning comes in quietly, almost respectfully, like it knows you didn't sleep much. You stir beneath your damp blanket, your body sincerely sore, but mind strangely alert. The sky has gone from black to steel grey, and every inch of the forest seems wrapped in dew and fog. You sit up, careful not to startle anything that might be creeping nearby, and take in the silence. There's no fire, just your breath, the faint rustle of leaves, and the slow, persistent drip of water from the canopy above. You stayed dark last night. No smoke, no glow, because you didn't like the look of that tree marker. And maybe that saved you, or maybe you were just being paranoid. Either way, it's a new day, and the forest isn't interested in giving you answers, just problems. Today's lesson is simple but miserable. Building shelter from nothing. Not a tent, not a lean-to you brought from REI. You're talking about the kind of structure built from scavenged branches, mud, leaves, and sheer desperation. Frontiersmen didn't always have canvas or tools on them. Sometimes they lost gear crossing a river, or had it torn by animals, or they just ran out of time and had to make do with whatever the woods handed them. You've got a knife, a hatchet, some twine, and a healthy dose of ambition. That'll have to be enough. The first step, choosing the right spot. You don't just plop down and start hacking. You look for natural shelter, a rock outcrop, a hollow tree, maybe a dense stand of evergreens. You find a slight hill with a mossy slope and a fallen log resting at its base. Good back support and wind protection. Not bad. Then comes the scavenging. You move like a raccoon with purpose, gathering long, sturdy branches for a frame. It's slow work and loud. Every step cracks a twig or sends birds fluttering. You feel exposed, but it's worth it. You need structure. Once you've got a decent pile, you drive the thickest branches into the ground to form two angled walls leaning against the log. It takes several tries to get them balanced. Some slide, some snap, choke. One falls and smacks your shin hard enough to leave a throbbing bruise you'll name later out of spite. Now the fun part. Insulation. You pile bark across the branches, weaving in leaves, pine needles, and even tufts of moss. It smells like a wet dog and last year's compost pile, but it'll keep out wind. Hopefully. You find some mud, thicken it with leaves, and smear it like primitive plaster to seal the cracks. It's a mess. You're a mess. But slowly, painfully, the structure begins to resemble something a desperate mammal might crawl into. Here's your historical fact. Many frontiersmen used what's called a wickiup for shelter, an indigenous design made from bent saplings, lashed together and covered with brush. Unlike a teepee, which was portable and suited for the plains, the wickiup was great for wooded areas and could be built quickly from local materials. It wasn't pretty, but it kept you alive when the weather turned cruel. Yours isn't quite a wickiup, it's more like a lopsided forest igloo, but it does the trick. You crawl inside, curl up, and feel immediate warmth as your body heat stays trapped beneath the layers of leaf mush and hope. Now for a fringe fact, some frontiersmen swore by the use of sweat lodges as both shelter and healing. They'd build a low, dome-like structure, seal it with hides or bark, and create steam using heated rocks and water. Not just for bathing, this was ritual and rejuvenation rolled into one. Out here, you'd kill for a sauna, but instead you settle for not freezing. Baby steps. But here's the academic wrinkle. Historians still debate whether most settlers learned shelter building from indigenous neighbours or invented it out of necessity. The romantic version says they respectfully adopted techniques. The less flattering version says they stumbled into survival, imitating what they saw without understanding the deeper practices behind it. Either way, the reality remains. If you couldn't build, you didn't last long. You spend most of the day reinforcing your tiny home. You add a few more layers, pile rocks at the base to block cold drafts, and even drag in some dry grass for bedding. It still smells like something died in there last fall, but it's progress. You've carved out a little bubble in the wilderness, and that's no small thing. As you step back and admire your handiwork, you feel something odd. Pride. Not the kind that comes from finishing a spreadsheet or cooking a decent dinner. This is feral pride, like you built a nest, a cave, a fortress. You're not comfortable exactly, but you're safer. Night starts falling again, painting the trees in deep purple and blue. You skip the fire tonight too, just in case, but you set up a perimeter. A few rocks in a pattern, a small noise trap with an old tin cup and twine. It won't stop anything determined, but it'll warn you. Maybe. You crawl into your structure and listen to the forest breathe. There's something calming about being inside something you made with your own hands. Even if it leaks, even if it leans weird. It's yours. The cold creeps in slower this time. You curl tighter, grateful for every scrap of insulation. The wind presses against your shelter, curious but not cruel. And as your eyes drift shut, you wonder how many people like you did this before. Unknown, unnamed, just trying to make it one more night. They didn't have blogs, or fame, or even headstones sometimes, but they figured it out. And so are you. You wake up confused, which is a nice change from waking up terrified. For a brief second, you're warm and dry and cozy inside your leaf-stuffed forest shanty, and your brain tricks you into thinking you're back in a bed somewhere. maybe with a real mattress and a roof that isn't made of sticks in desperation. But then your elbow brushes against something cold and wet and you hear a bird scream like it just stubbed its toe, and yeah, still in the woods, still surviving. Today's mission: find your way forward, without a compass, without GPS, and definitely without asking Siri. You're going full analog, relying on the sun, the shadows, and whatever bits of moss and lore your brain remembered from that one survival book you skimmed 6 years ago and never finished. You step out of your shelter and stretch. Everything pops. Your neck, your knees, probably a few internal organs. The air is crisp. The forest is cloaked in mist, thin and rolling, low along the ground like something out of a ghost story. The sun is barely a suggestion behind the trees, so you mark its location carefully. That faint glow in the east. That's your orientation for the day. You point toward it, say something whimsical like, "East, got it," and then immediately forget which direction you were originally facing. You spin around twice just to double check. Great start, but you get it eventually. You note the way the light hits the trees, how shadows fall across rocks, how moss grows on... Wait, isn't it supposed to grow on the north side? You look around, moss is everywhere. It's like a green explosion on every trunk. Thanks, nature. Super helpful. And here's your historical fact. Most frontiersmen didn't trust moss entirely for navigation. It's a myth that it always grows on the north side. It usually favours the shadiest, dampest part of a tree, which can shift depending on the terrain. What they trusted more? The sun, the stars of the wind, and most importantly, instinct honed by endless walking and years of mistakes. You're new, but not helpless. You use the sun's position to map out east and west, then look for other guides, the slope of hills, the flow of streams, even the bend of trees that have grown in one direction due to prevailing winds. You choose a heading, northwest, and start walking. The terrain shifts as you go. What was once soft loam and leaf litter becomes stony, root-filled paths that want to twist your ankle just for fun. You dodge fallen logs, duck under branches, and scan for signs of danger, or better yet, signs of life. You're not entirely sure what you're heading toward, but you're sure that moving beats sitting. After a while, you hit a ridge. It rises gently but yet steadily, and by the time you reach the top, you can see a patchwork of treetops below, and far in the distance what might be a lake. Or a mirage, hard to tell. Either way, it's something. You mark the line with a notch in a nearby tree and keep going. Here's your quirky frontier detail of the day. Some early explorers used mirrored surfaces, bits of polished metal or even shards of glass, to flash signals across long distances, sometimes as far as 10 miles if the light was right. It was a kind of Morse code before Morse code. You glance down at your canteen. Shiny enough? Maybe. If you get lost again, you might just start waving it at the sky like a confused disco ball. You also remember the concept of using shadows to tell time and direction. You test it, plant a stick, mark the tip of the shadow, wait 15 minutes. When the shadow moves, draw a line between the 2 points. Boom. East to west. Not fast, not flashy, but functional. You try it and yeah, it actually works. There's something satisfying about that. Like the forest gave you a nod of approval. But of course, here's where the scholarly debate rolls in like fog. Just how skilled were frontiersmen at celestial navigation? Some historians say they were practically wilderness astronomers, using stars and sun paths like a natural compass. Others argue they just followed rivers, trails, or animal paths and only a few truly knew how to orient themselves by the sky. Truth probably lives somewhere in between. You don't feel like a star whisperer, but you're starting to notice the way the world moves. You stop to rest near a stream and use the brake to build a quick sundial in the dirt, just to test your accuracy. It works, sort of. Close enough to keep you from walking in circles, which is more than most people can say without Google Maps. As the afternoon deepens, the light starts shifting golden. Shadows lengthen. The forest gets louder. Birds calling, squirrels doing parkour, something big crashing through the underbrush that you hope is just an enthusiastic deer and not a bear with dinner plans. You stay alert, walking with soft steps and eyes scanning constantly. You begin to understand how essential this skill was for survival. Not just moving, but knowing where and why you're moving. Here's another little-known trick. Frontiersmen sometimes navigated by smell. Certain plants grow near water. Certain tree types only thrive on specific slopes. Even the scent of decaying leaves can hint at elevation or moisture levels. It sounds ridiculous, until you catch a whiff of something floral and turn to see a patch of blooming goldenrod near a marshy dip. Your nose might be onto something. Eventually you spot a tree scarred by an old blaze mark, a vertical cut in the bark, almost grown over. Trail sign. Someone passed through here years ago, maybe decades, maybe longer. You press your fingers against it and feel a small jolt of connection, like a handshake through time. It gets you thinking about all the people who walked these paths before you, some with purpose, some just as lost as you are, but all of them moving forward, 1 foot at a time, guided by the sky and the ground beneath them. As dusk creeps in, you find a high ridge with a decent view and set up camp there. You've done enough wandering for one day. You feel tired but capable, like someone who belongs out here, at least a little. You look up. The first stars are starting to appear. The Big Dipper is easy to spot, and you trace its arc toward Polaris, the North Star. Constant, quiet, reliable. And for the first time since entering these woods, you don't feel lost. You sleep like driftwood, uneven, hard, and with the constant threat of rolling downhill. The ridge you camped on last night gave you a great view, sure, but it wasn't exactly designed for comfort. You wake with your face half pressed into a rock and your leg pinned awkwardly against a knot of roots. Your body feels like it's been folded into a suitcase. You groan, stretch, and emerge from your bedding like a bear that skipped hibernation and deeply regrets that choice. But you made it through the night, again, and now it's time to tackle something you've been putting off, turning animals into clothes. No, not because you're launching the next rustic fashion brand, but because you're going to need better insulation if you plan to survive anything colder than mildly brisk. And out here, you can't exactly order a fleece pullover from the nearest outfitter. You need fur, hide, and the age-old magic of brain tanning. Yep, that's a real thing. We'll get there. First, you need a hide. That means hunting or trapping something, which feels a little grim until you remember that survival is never cute. You don't have the luxury of guilt. You need materials, warmth, tools, so you return to that game trail you found earlier, the one etched through the underbrush like a whisper from something four-legged. This time you come prepared, with snares. Historically, frontiersmen crafted snares from whatever they had. Rawhide, vines, even strips of their own clothes. You use twine and some of that flexible green sapling you bent yesterday. You set a few loops in narrow parts of the trail, carefully disguising them with leaves and dirt, then back off. No dramatic soundtrack, just waiting. While the traps do their work, you head toward a clearing and start prepping what you hope will be your next project, tanning a hide. If that sounds like a gentle craft project, allow us to correct the record. It's disgusting. It's gritty, time-consuming, and the kind of thing that turns your hands into rawhide themselves. But it was a vital frontier skill, and one that kept people alive through no wind and the general indifference of nature. Here's your historical fact. Brain tanning was one of the most common methods used by both Native Americans and later frontiersmen. Why brains? Because every animal supposedly contains enough emulsified fats and oils in its brain to tan its own hide. Nature, ever practical, provides a one-stop shop for both meat and leather. Kind of horrifying. Also kind of brilliant. Now, you're not a tanner by trade, but you've read enough to know the rough steps. First, you scrape the hide to remove every last trace of meat and fat. Then, you soak it. Preferably not in the same pot you cook in, unless you like your stew with a hint of sinew. After that, the real fun begins, working the hide with the brains, which you mash into a paste and spread liberally. It smells like wet pennies and regret, but it softens the hide, keeping it from becoming stiff like cardboard. You check your traps in the afternoon and, miracle of miracles, one of them worked. A rabbit. You feel the jolt of adrenaline, then the steadying guilt. You kneel, whisper a thank you, because it feels wrong not to, and then get to work. Clean skin preserve. You roast the meat, set aside the bones, and keep the pelt intact. You're learning that out here, every part of something has value, even the bits we usually throw away. Back at camp, you start the brain tanning process. It's messy. Your hands are slick with goo, and the hide doesn't exactly smell like roses, but you're doing it. Stretching the hide between branches, scraping, rubbing, smoothing, then you hang it near your fire. Not directly in it, but above the smoke. The final step, smoking. This helps waterproof the hide, preserves it, and gives it that classic frontier smell, somewhere between campfire chic and barbecue gone wrong. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some frontiersmen and tribes believed the smoke also carried spiritual properties. purifying the material and preparing it for use in clothing or tools. Whether or not you believe in that, there's no denying that the smoking process changes the hide. It darkens, toughens, becomes something usable. It goes from dead flesh to living garment. And here's where the academic debate comes in. Some historians argue that frontiersmen weren't nearly as good at tanning as their indigenous neighbours, and often traded for finished hides instead. Others insist that over time European settlers developed their own rugged leather-working techniques out of necessity and repeated trial and error. The truth probably depends on the region, the person, and whether they were desperate enough to rub brain paste into a pelt at 3 PM. You're now officially in that category. The final product isn't perfect. It's a little stiff, uneven in spots, and smells rich, but it's wearable. You fashion it into a crude shoulder wrap, something to keep off the wind and add a layer of insulation. You look in a pool of water to check your reflection and can't help but laugh. You look halfway between forest druid and dishevelled time traveller. But hey, you made clothes from an animal you trapped and tanned yourself. That's not nothing. That's survival with a touch of style. As the sun dips and the fire crackles to life, you drape the remaining hide nearby to dry fully. You use some of the leftover sinew to strengthen a pouch you've been stitching together from bark and cloth scraps. Slowly your gear is evolving. Less lost camper, more wilderness cryptid. And when the stars return and the wind moves through the trees like a ghost brushing branches, you wrap your new pelt around your shoulders and realise you're not just surviving anymore. You're becoming something else. Something older. Something tougher. Something that knows how to make clothes from a carcass and walk into the night like you belong there. By now, your hands are calloused, your face is wind-chapped, and every inch of your body smells like meat smoke, pine needles, and something a little bit like despair, seasoned with stubbornness. But you're learning. Every day out here, you chip away another layer of softness, trading it for skills, instincts, and apparently animal goo-based clothing. You're still standing, and today, that's going to mean something. Because today, the cold creeps in like a rumour. It doesn't slam into you, there's no sudden snowstorm or dramatic wind shift, but it's there in the stillness, in the way the birds go quiet, in how the morning dew has turned to frost. You rub your hands together and blow into your cupped fingers. It's not winter yet, but it's knocking. Time to learn some cold weather tricks, without modern gear, Gore-Tex, or even a zipper. Just your wits, your body heat, and whatever the forest is willing to lend you without too much sarcasm. You start by layering, because even in the 1800s, people understood that warmth comes from trapping heat, not just from thick clothing. You take that rough, smoky pelt you made and wrap it over your shoulders, then stuff moss and dried grass into your sleeves and pant legs. It itches like a nightmare and smells like leaf mould, but it works. Every layer traps more of your body's heat, keeping it from leaking out into the vast, uncaring air. You build a windbreak next. Not a shelter, not yet. Just a wall of logs and branches on the upwind side of your camp to blunt the cold gusts that scrape through the trees. You reinforce it with bark slabs and pack mud into the cracks. It looks like a half-built beaver dam, but it buys you a few crucial degrees. Then you get to the fire. Yes, your oldest frenemy. You dig a Dakota fire hole, something you vaguely remember reading about. You carve 2 small linked holes into the ground, one for the fire itself, the other as an air intake. The result? A low, efficient burn that produces little smoke and even less wind exposure. You feed it twigs, pine cones and dry grass, then settle above it with your pelt pulled tight. It's not glamorous, but it's warm. Here's your historical fact. Frontiersmen often used heated stones for warmth, especially at night. They'd bury them in coals, let them absorb the heat, then wrap them in cloth or place them near their bedding. You try the same, dig out a few fist-sized rocks, let them roast beside your fire hole, then nestle them under your blanket when you lie down. It's like a primitive hot water bottle that smells faintly of ash and success. Food becomes fuel now, not just comfort. You chew through the last of your jerky and dried berries, then roast a handful of pine nuts and wild roots. It's not a feast, but it's warm. Everything revolves around warmth now. Your movements get slower, more deliberate. You're conserving energy, guarding your heat like a tiny fire inside your chest. And here's your weird but true frontier fact. Some trappers swore by smearing themselves with animal fat to retain body heat. Not as a joke, seriously. Bear fat, raccoon grease, anything oily. It sealed in warmth, kept moisture out, and smelled bad enough that even wolves might think twice. You haven't reached that level of desperation yet. but you have collected a small jar of drippings from your last rabbit roast. You eye it suspiciously. Not today, maybe. But soon, as you prep for nightfall, you build a low bed of pine boughs, laying them thick and springy to insulate you from the cold ground. You toss more grass and bark over your lean-to's gaps, stuffing every crevice you can find. It looks like a bear den, run by someone with no architectural training. Still, it holds heat. The scholarly debate, whether frontiersmen really slept alone in these frigid nights. Some historical journals suggest that solitary trapping was common. Others argue that wintering alone was rare, and mostly lethal. In colder seasons, many bunked together, in trading posts or shared tents, huddled like sardines with bad hygiene. Was the lone mountain man image real? Sort of. But only the best, or the luckiest, made it through entire winters solo. Most of them found each other or froze. Tonight, you're solo. And it's brutal. The wind picks up just after sundown, slipping through the trees with a steady, mournful moan. You huddle closer to your Dakota hole, feeding it slowly, guarding the flame like it's a secret. You press your back to your pelt, tuck your hands under your arms and breathe through your nose. You focus on staying small, tight, warm. Then you remember a trick you read about. Heating rocks and placing them at your feet before sleep. You do it, and it helps. The warmth crawls up from your toes like a slow, comforting tide. And now, a little wilderness superstition to wrap the night. Some frontiersmen believed that sleep in extreme cold could lead you closer to the spirits, that dreams became more vivid, more prophetic when your body danced near the edge of freezing. Not quite frostbite, not quite vision quest. Somewhere in between, you're not sure if it's true, but as you drift off on, wrapped in smoke and moss and rabbit fur, your dreams take on strange shapes. You dream of fireless cabins, of men with hollow eyes building walls from snow and bone, of wolves that speak in riddles and owls that guide lost travellers. It's surreal, it's eerie, it's strangely peaceful. And when you wake, the fire's low, your shelter creaks in the wind and your breath curls in long tendrils above your face. But you're alive, warmish, and one step closer to being the kind of person who survives anything, even the cold itself. You wake up with your fingers stiff and curled like the roots of a tree. For a moment, it takes effort just to uncurl them, like your body forgot how to be human overnight. The rocks at your feet are still faintly warm, bless them, but everything else feels like it's been dipped in ice water and regret. You grunt, roll over, and realise your breath is fogging up the inside of your makeshift shelter. It's warmer in here than out there, which isn't saying much. Time to deal with your next frontier problem. How to eat when nothing wants to be eaten. Winter, or even the whisper of winter, makes everything harder. Animals move less, plants vanish, insects go silent. The forest, once buzzing and alive, is now holding its breath. That means if you want food, you'll have to work for it. Or, ideally, outsmart it. Today, you focus on trapping. You check the snares you set yesterday, but they're untouched. One's been knocked loose, the string sagging like it gave up on life halfway through the night. You reset it, then follow a small animal trail leading into a thicket. The ground here is crisscrossed with tiny prints. Rabbit, maybe. Squirrel, something with more fur than you and fewer concerns about existentialism. You remember a trick from one of those wilderness guides you barely skimmed. The figure 4 deadfall. It's old, reliable, and incredibly satisfying to build. Once you stop swearing at the sticks, you find a flat rock for the killstone, then carve your 3 trigger pieces, the vertical post, the diagonal arm, and the bait stick. It takes forever to balance them just right. Every time you think it's perfect, the whole thing collapses in a sad clatter. But finally it holds, balanced like a wooden mousetrap just waiting for one hungry, unlucky creature to take the bait. You smear the stick with some of the leftover rabbit fat you saved in a pouch. Smells awful, which means it smells great to something furry and desperate. You set the trap and back away. Next, you craft a few snares from cordage and bent saplings. You've gotten better at hiding them, adding leaves, dirt, even broken twigs around the loop to make it look natural. You hum quietly while you work. Not because you're unhappy, but because the silence is starting to feel personal. Here's your historical fact. Trapping was a cornerstone of frontier survival, not just for food, but for trade. Beaver pelts, in particular, were currency. Mountain men like Jim Bridger and Kit Carson often trapped in the winter, when pelts were thickest and fetched the best prices. These weren't weekend hunters, they were professionals, risking frostbite for a few ounces of fur and the hope of a decent meal. But here's the fun twist, the fringe fact of the day. Some trappers swore by talking to their traps, not just muttering about how cold it was or how their luck had gone sour, but actual conversation, as if the forest were listening. They'd ask permission from the land, from the animal spirits, from whatever force decided if a snare would be full or empty. Some even left offerings, bits of tobacco, carved totems, or braided grass. Call it superstition, call it respect. Either way, it couldn't hurt. You find yourself doing the same. Just a quiet whisper as you finish setting the last trap, nothing dramatic, just a soft, hope you're hungry. Then it's time to wait. You spend the afternoon gathering more firewood, breaking branches over your knee until you start to feel like a very cold, very focused lumberjack. You find a downed tree and chip away at the bark with your hatchet, stuffing the dry, papery strips into your pouch. Birch bark, especially, the gold standard for catching fire. It curls and burns even when damp. It smells sharp, like nature's version of lighter fluid. You also keep your eyes peeled for edible plants, though pickings are slim. You spot some pine needles, high in vitamin C, great for tea, and chew a few. They taste like a Christmas tree, and an air freshener had a weird baby, but it beats scurvy. Later you find cattail roots near a frozen-over marsh. You dig a few up and carry them back to camp, mud and all. As the sun drops low, you check the traps again. Success. One snare holds a rabbit, small, shivering, already fading. You dispatch it quickly, murmuring thanks under your breath, then reset the snare. The deadfall? Empty. But you leave it alone. Traps work best when you stop checking them every 5 minutes like an anxious parent. Back at camp, you skin and clean the rabbit, saving every usable part. The bones for tools, the sinew for thread, the fat for fuel. The meat, of course, is tonight's dinner. You roast it over your Dakota fire hole, using a stick rack you cobbled together with notched branches. The smell is rich and wild, greasy in a way that makes your stomach growl, like something untamed. Here's the scholarly debate for today. Did frontiersmen rely more on trapping or hunting for sustenance in the long run? Some records suggest that while hunting was glamorized, it was inconsistent and exhausting. Trapping, though less romantic, offered a more stable yield, especially in winter. It required patience, not bullets, finesse over brute force. Your experience today seems to back that up. You didn't need to chase anything, just set your traps and wait. You eat slowly, savouring each bite like it's the last food on earth. You mix in the cattail roots, boiled to something vaguely chewable, and even steep some pine needle tea. It's bitter and hot, and it warms your fingers just holding the cup. You sit in the dark after dinner, watching the stars poke holes through the night sky. Your traps are set. Your fire is low but steady. You're full, not stuffed. Well, but enough. And that's something you haven't felt in a while. You realise that out here, comfort comes in strange packages. A caught rabbit, a dry patch of moss, a warm stone at your feet. You no longer chase luxury. You chase enough. And tonight you found it. The wind howls through the trees like a pack of wolves that lost something important. You lie in your shelter, blinking up at the ceiling of sticks and bark you patched together last week, thinking about calories, not dreams, not the meaning of life, just calories. You need more of them. The rabbit was good, but it's long gone, and you've been running a deficit that would make a banker nervous. You feel it in your legs, weak, twitchy. You feel it behind your eyes too, like your brain's trying to stay focused while your stomach files a formal complaint. So today, you're stepping into the weird frontier miracle that is jerky and pemmican. Not just trail snacks, not just beef stick cousins. These were the energy bars of the 1800s. They were shelf-stable, nutrient-dense, and weirdly delicious, if you didn't think too hard about the ingredients. They also kept frontiersmen alive through winters, long treks, and desperate moments when hunting failed. You start by gathering everything edible and dryable that you've got. Thin strips of rabbit meat, a handful of berries you found near the marsh. You think they're safe. You did the whole squish test, tasted a bit on your tongue, waited for your vision to stay normal. You even dig out a few nuts you tucked away in a pouch, walnuts if you're lucky, or possibly very enthusiastic acorns. Either way, protein is protein. To make jerky, you need thin cuts, low heat and airflow. You slice the rabbit meat into strips as thin as your patience will allow, then build a small smoking rack over your Dakota fire hole. The key is slow and steady heat, not roasting, not burning. You want the meat to dry, not cook. You've seen it done in diagrams. Sticks balanced like a triangle, meat strips hanging like laundry from a tiny primitive clothesline. The smoke rises, curling into the morning air, and the strips slowly begin to shrink and darken. It's a waiting game now, which of course gives you time to move on to pemmican. Here's your historical fact. Pemmican was a high-calorie, long-lasting food developed by indigenous peoples and adopted widely by fur traders and frontiersmen. It combined dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes dried berries. It didn't spoil easily, could be eaten cold or hot, and packed enough energy to keep people moving through snow, wind, and starvation. Think of it as prehistoric trail mix. If trail mix could punch you in the face with calories, you start by pounding the dried meat you already had, plus some older leftovers you've kept stashed and smoked into powder. You use a flat stone and a smaller round one as a mortar and pestle, which works better than you'd think and worse than you'd like. Once it's all a dusty, fibrous mass, you melt your saved rabbit fat in a tin cup over the fire. The smell is intense, but not in a bad way, more like bacon left in the sun too long if you're feeling charitable. Once the fat's fully liquid, you mix it with the meat powder and a few dried berries. You stir it all together until it forms a thick, sticky paste, not attractive, not even slightly, but when it cools, you roll it into small balls and press them flat, wrapping them in strips of bark and tucking them into your pouch. Congratulations, you just made frontier power food. Here's your fringe fact for the day. Some early trappers believed pemmican could bring you back from the edge of death. There are journals describing men who hadn't eaten in days, barely able to walk, and after a few bites of pemmican, they'd stagger back to their feet like a scene from a survival epic. Whether that's true or just the hunger talking, there's no doubt it was legendary stuff. You sample one now, it's greasy, chewy, slightly sweet. You taste smoke and blood and something like wild blueberry jam someone made in their garage. But it fills you in a way no roasted pine bark ever could. You feel the strength creep back into your limbs slowly, like warm water running into frozen pipes. Of course, no great day goes uninterrupted. While you're tending to the jerky rack, a gust of wind flattens half of it, knocking strips into the dirt. You scramble to recover what you can, but a few pieces are lost to the mud. A lesson in humility, again. You repair the rack, brace it with extra sticks, and make a mental note to build better windshields next time. Nothing out here stays perfect for long, not even jerky. As the day wears on, the scent of smoked meat spreads through the clearing like an open invitation to every predator with a nose. You stay alert, hatchet within arm's reach, eyes darting to the trees every time a twig snaps or a squirrel sounds, like it's trying to reenact a home invasion. But nothing comes. Not yet. That leads to today's scholarly debate. Did the smell of cooking meat attract predators often, or did frontiersmen exaggerate the threat? Some accounts suggest bears and wolves were regular dinner crashers, while others argue most wildlife stayed far away from fire and human scent. You figure it's safer to assume you smell like a walking buffet, and act accordingly. By sunset, the jerky is done. Dry, dark, slightly tough, but it passes the snap test. You pack it up alongside your pemmican and sit by the fire, chewing slowly, feeling that rare and sacred thing, security. At least for tonight, you have food. Real food. Shelf-stable calories that won't rot or melt or crawl away while you sleep. You wrap the extra fat in bark and bury it in the cold earth, deep and sealed tight. It'll keep better there, frontier refrigeration, courtesy of October's sting. You feel clever, you are clever. As darkness folds over the trees and the wind quiets just a little, you chew one more piece of jerky and lean back on your elbow. The stars come out, faint at first, then brilliant. You think about the trappers and scouts who sat like this, meat drying over a smoky fire, wondering how long it would last, how many days it would carry them forward. You don't have that answer either. But you've got pemmican, you've got jerky, you've got the kind of tired satisfaction that only comes after making something hard with your own hands. And tomorrow, when you move again, you won't be empty. You'll be ready. The next morning, you wake up with something new, a sore throat and a tickle behind your eyes that whispers, you're about to get very sick. It's subtle, like the first crack in a frozen pond. You try to ignore it. You cough once, no big deal, then twice, a little deeper. That's fine. But by the time you sit up, your head feels like it's packed with smoke, and your muscles ache like you fought a bear in your sleep and lost. It hits you fast, the creeping, hazy kind of illness, that doesn't knock you down all at once but makes everything harder. Your limbs feel heavy, you're cold, even with your layers. This is where the real frontier test begins. Not the predators, not the cold, but the sheer ugly inconvenience of getting sick when there's no medicine cabinet, no warm tea, no comfy couch. Just you. And a forest full of very unlicensed remedies. So today's mission? Playing 1800s wilderness apothecary, you shuffle to your fire pit and get the flames going with the ease of someone who's done it more times than they care to count. The smoke stings your eyes. Your nose is running. You look like the ghost of some lost prospector. But you're alive, and you know what you need to do next. Find medicine, real or improvised. Fast. You start by recalling the old remedies you've read about, the ones that aren't completely ridiculous. Willow bark comes to mind first. You trudge to the stream, coughing into your elbow, and start looking along the banks. Willow trees like water. And luck is finally on your side, thin, greyish bark with long drooping leaves. You cut a few strips and chew them slowly despite the bitterness. Here's your historical fact. Willow bark contains salicin, a compound similar to what modern aspirin is based on. For centuries it was used by indigenous peoples and settlers alike to reduce fever and ease pain. You're counting on that now, letting the woody taste settle on your tongue as you drink a little water and sit down before you fall over. Next, you gather pine needles, not for chewing this time, but for tea. High in vitamin C and you need something hot, something that will clear the fog out of your chest. You crush a handful and toss them into your boiling tin. The steam alone is worth it. It opens your sinuses, even if the taste is like drinking melted Christmas decorations. You think back to other odd frontier cures, a poultice of moss and mud for inflammation, spruce resin for sealing wounds and fighting infection, charcoal for upset stomachs. You don't need those yet, but the memory lingers. You're not in a hospital, you are the hospital. While the tea steeps, you build a sweat tent. Not for comfort, this isn't a spa day, but to break the fever threatening to settle into your bones. You dig a shallow pit, heat stones in your fire, then move them carefully into the hole. You drape your tarp and blankets over a low frame of bent branches, sealing the edges with mud and pine boughs. Then you crawl inside with a cup of pine tea and a pile of regret. The heat is stifling, your skin flushes, your head pounds, and sweat beads on your brow almost immediately. You force yourself to stay in there longer than you want to, breathing the sharp herb-scented air, letting it burn the fog out of your lungs. Here's your fringe fact. Some frontiersmen believed fevers weren't illnesses themselves, but spiritual battles. They used steam lodges and sweat baths not just to heal the body, but to purge the soul. You don't buy the mysticism, but inside this little sweat cave, it does feel like something's being driven out, something heavy and wrong. After what feels like an hour, you crawl out, drenched and dizzy. The air outside is sharp and cool, like stepping into another dimension. You breathe deep. You cough hard, and slowly you begin to feel a sliver of clarity return. You sleep most of the afternoon, wrapped in every scrap of fur and cloth you own. When you wake, the headache's still there, but the fever hasn't gotten worse. You eat a bit of pemmican. You drink more pine tea. You even chew more willow bark, because at this point, you'll take anything that makes you feel less like a dying raccoon. Here's the scholarly debate for the day. How effective were these natural remedies? Some argue they were surprisingly useful, especially when prepared correctly and used with experience. Others insist many were placebos at best, dangerous at worst. The truth? Probably a mix. Some remedies worked. Others just gave hope to people who had nothing else. But hope, out here, is medicine in its own way. As the sun sets, you sit by your fire, legs stretched toward the heat, your blanket wrapped around your shoulders like a worn-out cloak. You sip your tea and try not to think about how close this day came to breaking you. You felt worse, sure, but not often, and not without a backup plan. You lean back and look at the stars, still there, still watching. You think about all the people who had to do this, get sick, get better, or die, without antibiotics, without doctors, without even certainty, just trees and time and trial and error. But tonight, you're here. A little stronger, a little wiser, a little more bitter-tasting bark in your teeth than you'd like, but healing in that quiet frontier way that doesn't need fanfare. You stoke the fire, you sip again, you survive. By morning, the fever has retreated like a thief caught mid-theft. Still lurking, but no longer bold. Your head is clearer. Your limbs feel more like limbs and less like sacks of wet grain. And most importantly, you're upright, coughing less and hungry again. All good signs. So you stand, stretch your spine until it pops like snapping twigs, and decide it's time to do something you've been putting off. You're going to try to communicate. Not with animals, not with ghosts or forest spirits, with people. Because whether it's help, trade, or a friendly voice that doesn't belong to your own tired internal monologue, contact might be the thing that finally tips the scales from surviving to living. Out here, though, shouting hello into the trees is about as effective as whispering into a canyon. You need to speak the old way. You need smoke signals and flashes, and tricks the frontiersmen used when radios were a wild dream, and shouting often meant getting shot at or ignored. You start with a basics, a signal fire. This isn't your standard cooking flame. It needs to be large, noticeable, and smokier than your average breakfast skillet. So you gather dry wood first, enough to get a healthy blaze going. But the secret ingredient? Green leaves, fresh pine needles, wet moss. Anything that'll smoulder and send up thick, slow-moving plumes of grey into the sky. You find a clearing near a rise, just opened enough to see the sky. You build the base of the fire, light it, then pile on the green stuff. Immediately smoke pours out in wild, dancing curls. Not wispy, dense, heavy. It rises fast and high. And then the trick. You use your blanket like a flapper, cutting off the flow in rhythmic bursts. Up, down, up, down. You try to make it 3 distinct bursts, like the classic SOS of visual signalling. Or maybe it just looks like a smoky shrug. Either way, it's out there now. Someone could see it. Maybe. Here's your historical fact. Native American tribes and early scouts used smoke signals for long-distance communication. They weren't universal, every group had different codes, but 3 puffs often meant distress. 1 long stream might mean we're here. 2 bursts could mean anything from enemy near to dinner's ready. You keep it simple, make it obvious, and you repeat it every 20 minutes. Then you move on to the next method, mirror signalling. Now you don't have a mirror. You have a metal tin cup, the back of your knife, both polished by sheer use and your obsessive habit of rubbing things clean when you're bored. You practice catching the sun, angling it until it reflects a sharp flicker onto a distant tree. The trick is to aim with 2 fingers in a V, sight through them, and bounce the light through that gap. Primitive laser pointer. Of course, the sun's being uncooperative, dodging behind clouds like a bashful actor. Still, you get a few strong flashes in, pointed toward what you think is the edge of an old trail you crossed 3 days ago. If anyone's nearby, they'll see it, or they'll think the trees are haunted. Either outcome entertains you. Here's a fringe fact. During the 1800s, some trappers swore by using shiny buttons or even shards of broken glass to signal each other. One man's trash was another man's emergency flare. There are even stories of travellers carrying pocket mirrors just for communication, especially during long solo trips. No batteries, just sunlight, luck, and geometry. You spend the rest of the afternoon making your camp more visible. Not flashy, just signs that someone is here. You stack rocks in unnatural formations, cairns pointing toward your fire pit. You scratch an arrow into a tree trunk pointing south. You even hang a bit of cloth from a high branch, fluttering like a signal flag. And now the scholarly debate. How often did people actually find each other this way? Some accounts claim that smoke signals saved lives, that they guided lost trappers home or brought help to isolated camps. Others suggest they were mostly ignored or misread. After all, smoke could mean anything, cooking, clearing brush, or a bad day with your firewood. But when you're alone, even the possibility of being seen to becomes worth the effort. By evening, the smoke has stopped rising, and the sun is dipping low. You haven't seen any sign of response. No return flashes, no distant figures, no other smoke. But that's okay. You've put yourself on the map now in the quietest way possible. And the act of doing it did something else. It reminded you that you're not a ghost. You're not forgotten. You're still here. Still clever, still capable of reaching out even if no one's on the other end. You cook what's left of your meat, boil more pine needles, and stare into the fire. In the old days, they called this kind of communication signs and wonders, a way to talk without talking, a language of flame and light and silence. You watch the sky turn from gold to ash. Then you set up a few more signals, just in case someone wanders by. A stick figure made from bones and twine, a circle of stones too perfect to be random. Because maybe the real lesson of frontier signalling isn't about being found. Maybe it's about reminding yourself that you want to be. The moon is a perfect coin tonight, just slightly tarnished at the edges, hanging low and bright over the treetops. It bathes everything in a soft, silvery wash, and for the first time in a long while, the forest doesn't feel like it's closing in on you. It feels like it's waiting, watching maybe, but not in a hostile way. Just curious. And that's good, because tonight, you're taking on one of the most delicate, dangerous parts of frontier living. Cooking food without attracting company you'd rather not meet. Silent campfire cooking wasn't just a skill, it was a literal survival tactic. Because every time you lit a flame, every time the scent of sizzling meat drifted into the trees, something else could smell it too. Wolves, bears, cougars, or worse, other humans with empty stomachs and no scruples. So if you wanted to eat and live to talk about it, you had to cook like a ghost. You start by digging deeper than usual. Not just a fire pit, an oven in a way. A Dakota fire hole again, but this time with more insulation. You widen the chamber, line it with stones you've heated in the sun all afternoon, and pack the space around them with damp earth to hold the heat. You're not looking for light, you're looking for coals, clean, hot, and nearly invisible. Next comes the fuel, not a roaring bundle of dry wood, but small sticks, hard, dense, dry enough to burn clean without too much smoke. You've learned which woods behave and which throw a tantrum in the fire. Pine, too flashy, resinous, smoky. Oak and hickory, better, more steady, are hot, without betraying your location. You light it carefully, one spark at a time. The kindling catches, the coals glow, and you sit close enough to feel the warmth but far enough to stay hidden in shadow. Above, the sky shifts from navy to ink, and now it's time for the main event, cooking in silence. Here's your historical fact. Frontiersmen sometimes cooked by burying their food in coals, then covering it with dirt and leaves. A crude version of pit roasting. It muffled smell, dimmed the firelight and kept food tender. You decide to try the same with your last strip of rabbit meat and a handful of cattail root. You wrap them in large leaves and you pack them with wild herbs for flavour, juniper, some mint, and tie the bundle with stringy bark cord. Then you tuck it gently into the hot earth and cover it. No smell, no hiss of fat dripping into flames. Just a slow bake in nature's oldest oven. While you wait, you brew a small pot of pine tea, letting it simmer low over the coals. The scent is faint, herbaceous, not greasy. Safe. You keep a sharp eye on the tree line, listening for anything that doesn't belong. That brings us to your fringe fact for the night. Some trappers believed you could fool predators by cooking underground and then masking the scent trail with the natural materials, spruce boughs, ash, even urine. That's right. They'd literally pee in a circle around camp to create a barrier animals might hesitate to cross. You haven't reached that level of commitment yet, but you do scatter pine needles around the area and rub a bit of ash on your hands and clothes just in case. Frontier cologne. Now for the scholarly debate. How often did predators actually attack frontier camps? Some say it was rare. Wild animals usually avoided humans unless starving. Others insist it was frequent enough to warrant constant vigilance. What's known for sure is that fear of being ambushed while cooking was real. Fires meant food, and food meant attention. So you cook low, eat fast, and never, ever fall asleep with food scraps lying around. After an hour, you carefully uncover your meal. The leaves are charred around the edges, but the meat is tender, steaming, and infused with a wild, earthy aroma that makes your mouth water. You tear a piece with your fingers and chew slowly. It tastes smoky, herbal, soft. The cattail root is starchy and bland but filling, and above all it's quiet food. No sizzling, no crackling, no billowing clouds of meat-scented smoke inviting every curious nose in a 5-mile radius. You finish eating and immediately bury the scraps. Not in the same place. You hike 20 paces away and dig a fresh hole, double deep. You know better now. You scatter dirt, moss, leaves, then rinse your hands in cold stream water, scrubbing until they smell like nothing at all. You even change your outer layer, your pelt, so that the scent of cooking doesn't cling to you when you sleep. Then you do something that's become second nature out here. You listen. You lean back against your shelter, blanket over your knees, eyes half-lidded, and you listen to the creak of trees, the rustle of leaves, the distant crack of a branch somewhere too far to worry about and too close to ignore. No howls, no growls, just the quiet kind of night that means you did it right. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you think about old journals, passages where mountain men talked about eating understers without firelight so as not to tempt the night. They weren't being poetic. They were being literal. Light was danger, smell was risk, sound was a beacon. So you go to bed tonight not warm and cosy, but cautious and fed. A full belly in seremos, a meal no one else noticed, a victory without applause. The moon still hangs high, silver and smug. Your fire pit glows faintly, just embers now hidden beneath layers of dirt. Your hands smell of ash. Your breath curls upward like invisible steam. And as you close your eyes, you think, this is how it's done. Not loudly, not recklessly, just one quiet, perfect fire in the dark. The next day, you open your eyes to frost clinging to your lashes like crystal dust. Your nose is cold, your fingertips are colder to you, and the breath you exhale swirls above your face before disappearing like a ghost trying to say something cryptic. You sit up slowly, joints popping, shoulders tight from sleeping curled like a comma, and realise you've reached a new frontier milestone. You're out of trade goods. That is, you have no more sugar, no more tobacco, and no more of anything shiny or vaguely luxurious to offer if you were to stumble upon another soul out here. You've got meat, you've got tools. But on the frontier, survival wasn't just about eating and not dying, it was about knowing how to barter, how to trade your way into favours, allies, or just that rare piece of gear you didn't have the means or time to craft yourself. Today you're diving into frontier economics, the weird, wonderful world of bartering with beads, bullets, beer, and just a little bit of charm. You start by taking inventory. Your knife is still decent, your hatchet's chipped but reliable. You have a few strips of pemmican, 2 pieces of jerky, 1 mostly worn rabbit pelt, and a pouch filled with odds and ends, pine resin, fish bones, twine, even a few smooth stones you thought might be useful for something, maybe sling ammo, maybe skipping across bordermen, who knows. You begin crafting a few items specifically to trade. It's a gamble, of course, you haven't seen another human in days, but you remember an old trapper saying in a journal that the forest is never as empty as you think, it just gets quiet when it listens. That's been stuck in your head ever since, so you get to work. First, you take the last of your pine resin, mix it with charcoal from your fire and a bit of fat, and warm it gently into a sticky black glue. Pitch. Great for sealing seams, fixing boots, and, if you trade right, getting someone to offer you something much more valuable in return. You pour it into a bark container and set it aside. Next, you make fishing hooks from bone, tiny things whittled down from a rabbit's femur, curved and sharpened with the edge of your knife. You notch grooves into the side, a rough attempt at barbs. Not beautiful, but functional. You imagine holding them out to someone and saying, these could catch your dinner, and watching their eyebrows go up. You even make a needle, another bone, even smaller, with a painstakingly poked hole near the top for sinew thread. Primitive sewing kits were gold in the wild. One well-timed stitch could save a coat, or a person. Here's your historical fact. On the frontier, money wasn't king, utility was. The Hudson's Bay Company once had a standardised system of trade called made beaver, where one good quality beaver pelt equalled a certain number of trade points. Everything from knives to kettles to cloth had a value in beaver. You could walk into a trading post, slam a pile of furs on the counter, and walk out with a rifle if you'd done well enough trapping that season. But outside of trading posts, it was the wild west of economics, bartering based on need, trust, and perceived worth. You bundle your goods into a small pouch, tie it shut, and stash it in your pack, just in case. It feels good to be prepared, even for an encounter that might never come. And then, because today is about social survival, you decide to practice your pitch. You sit near the fire and imagine the kind of trade talk that happened out here in the woods, away from the formality of posts or towns. You picture meeting another traveller, a hunter, a scout, maybe a half-starved trapper, just looking for flint or fire. What would you say? I've got pitch for your flask. Need a needle? These are bone, sharp and sturdy. Trade you jerky for something smoked. You realise that tone matters more than words. Confidence, not arrogance. A sense of fairness. You've read that some frontiersmen could make or break deals with just a raised eyebrow. That people remembered who treated them fairly, and who tried to take advantage. Out here, reputations carried farther than your voice could. Here's a fringe fact for your mental vault. Whiskey was one of the most prized trade items on the frontier, not just for drinking, but for disinfecting wounds, bribing gatekeepers, and smoothing over tense conversations. In some cases, it was currency itself. There were entire trap lines where a man could go from hut to hut trading beaver pelts for sips of whiskey like some kind of fur-clad pub crawl. You've got none to offer, but you make a mental note. If you ever stumble across a distiller in the woods, be very, very nice. As the afternoon wears on, you head out to walk the perimeter, not just to check your traps, but to look for signs, tracks, smoke trails, something human. It's been too long since you've seen another face. Part of you craves it. The other part flinches at the thought. And that leads to today's scholarly debate. How social were frontiersmen really? Were they the lone wolves we imagine, or did they rely heavily on informal trade networks, friendships and temporary alliances? The answer, of course, is both. Some were drifters by nature, avoiding contact whenever possible. Others thrived in loose communities, people who saw each other once every season, but who knew names, stories, debts. In a land without rules, they built their own. Back at camp, you light the evening fire and set one of your bone hooks into a hand-twisted line of sinew, just to see if you can catch something in the stream nearby. You wedge a stick into the muddy bank, tie the line and wait. And tomorrow maybe you'll travel farther. Maybe you'll find someone to barter with. Or maybe not, but tonight you sleep with your trade kit beside you, ready to negotiate your way into whatever the forest throws next. Because survival isn't just hunting and hiding. Sometimes it's knowing what something's worth and when to let it go. The sound wakes you before dawn, a slow, low rumble that creeps in from the horizon like a secret coming undone. You sit up fast, ears straining, instincts sharpened by a dozen nights of not trusting anything with volume. It's not footsteps, not an animal. This is deeper, more constant. Then you smell it. Rain, big rain. The air has shifted, heavy with moisture and the metallic scent of coming storms. You scramble to your feet, immediately grateful for the extra bark you added to your shelter last night. But this won't be just a drizzle. This is going to be a soak to the bone, crush your camp, ruin your fire kind of storm. Time to move fast. Storms on the frontier weren't just inconvenient, they could be deadly. A flash flood, a falling branch, or a cold snap following a wet night could drop a man in his tracks. That's why today's mission is simple. Become a weather reader. Learn the signs, build the response, stay dry, stay warm, and hopefully not get squashed by lightning. You begin with the sky. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the clouds glow like bruises behind the trees, dark grey, tinged with green. That's not just rain. That's stormfront behaviour. Fast-moving, low-hanging clouds rolling in like waves. You see them through gaps in the trees, pushed hard by wind you can't feel yet, but know is coming. You quickly reinforce your shelter. Add crossbeams from fallen limbs. Wedge rocks at the base where water might seep in. Dig a trench around it. An old settler trick you half recall, angled to pull water away. Your hands are covered in mud, nails full of pine needles, and there's a tight hum in your chest that feels a lot like worry. And here's your historical fact. Early frontiersmen didn't just guess at weather, they studied it. Cloud shapes, animal behaviour, even how smoke rose from a fire. High, fast smoke. Calm air, low swirling smoke, incoming wind. Today, your smoke hugged the ground and spun in spirals before disappearing. You didn't understand what that meant when you first saw it. You do now. The forest itself starts shifting. Birds stop calling, squirrels vanish, thieves tremble in gusts that come and go like breaths held too long. You spot ants moving their hill, digging deeper. Another sign. Everything knows. Everything's bracing. You finish the trench and cover your fire pit, placing your metal cup upside down over the coals to keep them dry. Then you gather firewood and stash it under an overhang of rock you found nearby. Dry wood is currency now. Wet wood is useless. You even peel bark and sash it inside your coat, pressed against your body for warmth and safekeeping. If you need tinder later, this will save your life. Here's your fringe fact. Some trappers swore that you could smell storms before they arrived. Ozone. Crushed leaves. The tang of earth turned wet before a single drop falls. Others claimed they could feel it in their bones, in healed wounds that throbbed like alarms. Some even said if your fire wouldn't stay lit, it meant rain within hours. You laughed at that once. You're not laughing now. By mid-morning, the wind has arrived in full. It tears through the trees, bending them just enough to make you nervous, but not enough to snap anything near you. Yet, you pull your pelt tighter, duck into your shelter, and wait. Then the rain comes. It doesn't start. It arrives. A wall of water crashing down in a deafening roar. Everything becomes noise. The roof above you groans and leaks in places you thought were sealed. The fire pit hisses under its cover. The trench fills and drains and fills again. You curl into yourself, knees to chest, holding still while the sky shouts overhead. This is the part no one romanticizes. You think about the old stories of rugged frontiersmen toughing it out in storms, smiling like they enjoyed it. They didn't. No one enjoys being soaked to the skin while thunder cracks trees apart, but they endured it, because they had to, and so do you. The scholarly debate for the day. Whether early settlers used actual forecasting skills or simply reacted to weather as it came. There's evidence for both. Some had journals with pages dedicated to storm patterns, seasons, and what they meant. Others just rode it out no matter what came. Either way, they survived by adapting fast. You're doing the same now, just without the romantic backdrop. Just you, a muddy shelter, and the full weight of the sky. Eventually the worst passes. The rain softens, the wind loses its teeth. You peel yourself out of your shelter like old bark and stretch your legs in the damp, steaming aftermath. The forest looks freshly scrubbed, glittering, dripping, 1,000 shades of green. You're wet, cold, hungry, but upright. That's more than a lot of folks could say after a storm like this. You rebuild the fire slowly. Coals barely survived, but you coax them back to life with the dry bark you saved. It catches. The smoke rises straight and thin now. No spiral. That's a good sign. You heat some tea. You chew what's left of your jerky. You shiver, but it's more reflex than fear now. The worst is over. And tonight, as you dry your boots by the fire, you whisper a quiet thanks to whoever first taught someone to read the clouds. You watch the steam curl from your socks. You think about the subtle signs, the ones you'll pay attention to now. The forest always speaks before it strikes. You just have to learn to listen. The forest has that post-storm hush to it, the kind that makes you feel like you're walking across the floor of a cathedral where something sacred just happened. Something loud and wild and holy. The leaves are slick and glistening and heavy with droplets that drip steadily like nature's own leaky plumbing. Every footstep is soft and quiet. Too quiet. Which wouldn't be a problem except for the new issue crawling up your arms and into your sanity. Bugs. They're back. After days of cooler weather, the rain has summoned them like some unholy summoning circle. Gnats swarm your face, mosquitoes dive bomb your ears, and something tiny and tenacious keeps biting your ankles with the fervour of a creature that has never once respected personal boundaries. You slap, scratch, grumble, swat. Nothing helps for long, and you realise with slow dread that you have no bug spray, no netting, no little citronella candle in a cute tin. Time to get gross. Time to get clever, because tonight you're diving into the pungent, practical world of frontier bug repellents. You start by revisiting what you do have. Smoke, fire, and a handful of half-melted pine sap you scraped off a tree days ago. It's sticky and fragrant, good for sealing cracks and burning slowly. You toss a chunk into the fire, and the smoke immediately thickens, takes you on a sharper edge. The mosquitoes don't vanish, but they back off slightly, annoyed and confused. You sit in the smoke like a condemned ham. It helps, but it's not enough. Then you remember an old trapper's trick you read once in a dusty yellow-page survival guide. Animal fat. Specifically bear grease. Now you don't have bear grease because you have the very reasonable instinct to not get within arm's reach of a bear, let alone render one like you're making Pioneer soap. But you do have rabbit fat, a small stash of it stored in a pouch for cooking. Not much, but enough to work with. You melt it slowly, add crushed pine needles, a bit of mint, even a smear of ash from last night's fire. You stir it all together into a foul-smelling paste, then hesitantly dab it along your wrists, your ankles, your neck. Feels like you're marinating yourself in forest stew. But the bugs hate it. They hover, then retreat. One bold gnat tries a landing and immediately takes off like it made a mistake it'll regret forever. Here's your historical fact. Early frontiersmen used all kinds of repellents. Some swore by crushed herbs, pennyroyal, sweetgrass, cedar. Others went full beast mode and smeared themselves with animal fat mixed with ash or mud. There are even reports of folks mixing gunpowder with lard to create a paste that repelled bugs, and presumably everyone else as well. The goal wasn't elegance, it was effectiveness. You walk around your camp reeking of fat and needles, and it works. The cloud around you disperses. Your sanity begins to return. You build a new fire and toss in handfuls of green, damp leaves, creating long trails of smoke. You sit near it, keeping the breeze in your favour. A human chimney in the woods. Here's your fringe fact for the day. Some frontier guides claimed garlic was the ultimate bug repellent. Eat it raw. Rub it on your skin, chew it constantly. Mosquitoes, they said, wouldn't come near. You didn't believe it until you once camped next to a guy who ate an entire raw bulb and didn't get a single bite all night. He also didn't get a single conversation started, but that's the price of solitude. You don't have garlic. But you do find a patch of wild mint growing near a boggy patch just past your traps. You crush some leaves, rub them into your skin like a very poor spa treatment, and add a bundle to the next batch of melted fat. The result is sharp, almost medicinal. You're basically inventing early cologne. Call it eau de swamp by desperation. Now here comes the scholarly debate. Did these methods actually work, or were they just wishful thinking? Some entomologists say that the oils in certain plants genuinely repel insects. Others believe it was the smoke doing most of the heavy lifting. Still, historical records are full of recipes, from ash and urine mixtures to slathering mud over the skin like a living statue. One thing's clear. The people who lived out here didn't rely on comfort. They relied on trial and error, and the strong will to not get eaten alive by things with 6 legs and no conscience. You store the rest of your bug paste in a piece of birch bark folded tight and sealed with twine. Not pretty, but functional. You tie it to your pack and feel a small swell of pride. You made your own repellent. You smell like a compost heap, but you're bite-free for the first time in hours. As night falls, the bugs return, hungry and angry, but this time you're ready. You've got smoke, fat mint, and enough ash on your skin to be mistaken for a chimney sweep. You sit by the fire, not swatting, not twitching, just calmly watching the flames with a smug, greasy glow. And maybe this is what being a frontiersman really means. Learning to embrace the weird, the gross, the primitive. Turning problems into paste and wearing your solutions like a badge of honour. Or at least a very off-putting cologne. The wind shifts, the fire pops. A mosquito buzzes close, then veers away like it just remembered a better appointment. You smile, let them come. There's something about walking alone through a forest after surviving a storm. Hunger, sickness, and a bug invasion that shifts the way you carry yourself. You move differently now, lighter on your feet, quieter. Almost like the woods are starting to accept you. Not quite welcoming you with open arms, but nodding in that distant, reluctant way of someone who finally respects your persistence. You've stopped breaking every twig in your path. You've learned to breathe in rhythm with the wind. You're starting to speak the unspoken language of the wild. And that's today's lesson. The frontier's silent language. Not words, not shouts or signs, but the subtle, deliberate marks that carried meaning when speaking out loud would get you killed, or followed or left behind. It begins with observation. As you move through the trees, you start noticing carvings, small deliberate notches in bark. Not natural, too straight, too intentional, a horizontal line, then another one, a few hundred feet later, this time paired with a diagonal slash above it. Trail signs, likely. Not left for you, but for someone. You trace your fingers over them, feeling the rough edges, the age. Someone passed this way and wanted someone else to know. You think back to the old codes. Trappers had entire silent systems, scratched marks, stacked stones, feathers tied to branches. A cross might mean danger, 3 stacked stones. Camp here, a spoil. Game trail. You start marking your own, careful not to damage trees beyond necessity. 1 notch means I passed through, 2 means come this way. You mark them high enough that casual wanderers won't see, but any practiced eye might. Here's your historical fact. Frontiersmen often used blazes, knife cuts in trees, as directional guides. Each scout had a slightly different method. Some used symbols like arrows or circles. Others just stripped bark in a vertical line to indicate a trail. It was subtle, efficient, and lasted long enough to guide others for weeks, sometimes years. But more than that, silence itself was a language. When travelling with others, frontiersmen relied on gestures. A raised fist for the stop, a flick of fingers left or right for direction. A clenched hand meant danger nearby. You practice them now, even though you're alone, just to feel how they live in your body. The muscle memory of survival. You also start reading the signs left by others. Boot prints in soft earth, maybe a week old. Ash buried in a way only humans do, a single feather tied with sinew to a sapling twisting gently in the wind. You don't touch it. Could be a warning, could be a signal, either way. It speaks. Then there's the sound, or the lack of it. Birds will tell you if someone's coming. Their calls shift when humans move through. Jays screech when startled. Woodpeckers pause mid-drumming. You start to notice when the forest goes too quiet. A bubble of silence often means someone or something is within it. You pause when that happens, always. Here's your fringe fact. Some frontiersmen claim to communicate by boot music, that is, the specific rhythm of someone's walk, the way they stepped. An old scout might recognise a friend's stride just from how the ground sounded under their boots. True or not, it makes you more aware of your own cadence. You adjust it. Quieter, softer, less predictile. Around midday you come across a trapline, fresh, not yours. The snares are newer, tighter, made from sinew you didn't twist, and the bait is clever, twigs arranged with crushed berries, the scent masked with pine resin. You back away. This is someone's territory. You don't take, you don't interfere. But you do leave a mark, a single X in the dirt off to the side. A neutral signal, I saw, I left, I mean no harm. This leads to the scholarly debate of the day. How formalised were these non-verbal systems among frontiersmen? Some argue they were widespread and consistent, like a secret forest Morse code. Others believe they were more improvised, dependent on individual partnerships and regions. What's likely true is this. Survival created its own language. Not perfect, not universal, but functional. And in that silence, there was trust. You return to camp later that evening with a strange feeling, like you've been part of a conversation that didn't need words. Your own marks, your own steps, all part of a dialogue older than letters or maps. You sharpen your knife in the fading light, then use it to etch a small arrow into the bark above your camp entrance. Just in case someone ever finds this place and wonders if they should come closer or walk away. You sit by your fire, fingers stained with bark and soil, thinking about how loud modern life is. Out here, a single footprint says more than a shout. A twig snapped in the wrong rhythm can trigger a sprint or a standoff. You wonder how many messages you've missed before this, how many trails you passed without knowing they were trying to speak. But not anymore. Now you see them. Now you speak back. You sleep that night with your ear pressed to the earth, listening, not for words but for meaning. A silence full of signs, a forest that speaks in marks and motions, a language that only the patient get to learn, and you're learning it. You wake with blood in your mouth, not from coughing or sickness, but from biting your cheek in your sleep. The pain is dull, almost forgettable, but the metallic taste lingers, and with it comes the realization that you're not just tired. You're worn thin. Days have piled on top of each other like wet leaves, storm, hunger, cold, silence, and now your body is beginning to tap out. Muscles ache in ways that don't go away after rest. Your skin feels too tight, and your left ankle is swollen just enough to make you limp. Injuries on the frontier aren't events. They're episodes, slow-burning threats that creep under the skin, settle in the joints, and quietly decide whether you make it to next week. And when you're alone, the smallest injury becomes a saboteur. You don't get to wait it out. You fix it, or it festers. You limp to the fire and get it going again, slower this time, your movements stiff. You heat water and sip it with jerky. The swelling in your ankle reminds you of something from a fur trapper's journal. A twisted foot in the wilderness is as good as being hunted. He wasn't wrong, you can't afford to lose mobility. Every trip for wood, every waterhaul, every defensive move depends on your ability to move and react. Today's goal is clear. Learn how to deal with the injury when there's no clinic, no ice pack, no helpful voice on a speakerphone telling you to elevate your foot. Just you and the grim but weirdly resourceful medical cabinet that is the forest floor. You begin with rest, but the right kind. You build a crutch from 2 Y-shaped branches, lashing them with sinew and pine bark rope. It's crude, but it takes some pressure off the ankle. Next, you dig into your mental library of backwards medicine. You need something to reduce inflammation. Willow bark again. You chew a strip and then use the rest to make a tea. You find a few yarrow leaves near the stream. Miracle plant of the old world. Anti-inflammatory, antiseptic. You mash it into a poultice with cool mud and wrap it around your ankle using a strip of cloth you tear from your spare shirt sleeve. It's itchy, damp, and uncomfortable, and it helps. Here's your historical fact. Many frontiersmen carried small pouches of healing herbs, yarrow, comfrey, even garlic if they could get it. They learned most of this from native tribes who understood the land not just as shelter or sustenance, but as pharmacy. Some plants were for wounds, others for fever. Some just made you vomit, which disturbingly was considered a useful reset button back then. Your fringe fact? Some old trappers used animal parts as medicine. Bear grease for sprains, powdered deer antler for male vigour, whatever that meant. even snakeskin, dried and worn as a charm to ward off infection. You try to focus on the plants. You test your ankle after a few hours, still tender but stable. You make a longer splint, 2 straight sticks wrapped around the joint, tied snug. It gives support, enough that you can hobble without dragging the leg. You keep weight off it as much as possible. Every step is a reminder. You're one fall, one twist, one bad move away from real trouble. The sun rises higher and you decide to tackle another minor injury that's been bothering you. A raw patch on your palm from firewood hauling. You clean it with boiled water, then dab on some pine resin. It stings hard, but the resin seals the wound, makes it waterproof. Nature's band-aid, sharp-smelling and sticky as guilt. And here comes the scholarly debate. How effective were these natural remedies really? Some historians argue that frontiersmen had remarkably high survival rates from injury considering their conditions, largely due to their knowledge of herbal medicine and sheer grit. Others say their wounds often became chronic, infected or deadly, and that for every man who healed, 3 more limped home or didn't make it out of the woods at all. Both are likely true, but here's the thing. Frontier healing wasn't just physical, it was mental. You had to believe you could get better. You had to act like survival was inevitable, even if you were dripping blood and half frozen. Doubt didn't heal wounds. Grit did. You think about that as you sit by the fire, resting the ankle, mashing more yarrow. You remember a passage you read once, some fur trapper, whose name is long forgotten, who said, "The body will follow the mind until one of them gives out." You didn't understand it then. You do now. Because every bruise, every cut, every pulled muscle you've gotten out here hasn't just been about pain. It's been about your response, not screaming, not quitting, just patching, adjusting, moving forward. You're not out here to be comfortable. You're out here to be. As the day winds down, you make a sling out of old fabric for your foot, elevate it with rocks, and build a better bed of pine boughs to rest on. You rewrap your palm, drink more tea, chew another strip of willow bark. You even hum a little. Because weirdly enough, the pain has become part of the routine. Not welcome, but familiar. And maybe that's the heart of frontier medicine. Not curing, not fixing, just enduring. Long enough for the body to catch up with the will. You fall asleep with your foot wrapped in plants, your hands smelling of pine resin, and your mind strangely calm. Because pain is a language too, and you've learned how to speak back. You wake before dawn, not from noise, not from cold, but from instinct. Something primal stirs just beneath the surface of your consciousness. A soft alarm that doesn't ring but presses. You lie still, eyes open in the dark, listening. The fire's out. The coals have gone cold and the air is sharp again. That clean edge of early morning that makes you want to pull your blanket tighter and forget the world exists. But your brain is already wide awake, asking one critical question. Did you get colder last night, or is the temperature still dropping? You sit up, stretch carefully to test your ankle. It holds, still tender but improving, and glance around camp. The sky is still black, but the stars are gone, hidden behind thick, unmoving clouds. You feel it in your bones. The cold isn't just visiting anymore. It's planning to stay. And so today, but your mission is simple, if not easy, sleeping without freezing to death. No fire, that's sometimes safer. No tent, never had one. No down sleeping bag rated for Arctic tundra? Obviously not. What you do have is everything you've learned and everything you can scrounge. The first step is insulation, from below. Most people think cold comes from the air, but experienced frontiersmen knew better. The ground steals your warmth faster than the wind ever could. So you rebuild your bedding from scratch, pine boughs 6 inches deep, then a layer of dry leaves, then more boughs. You layer it like a cake made of flammable misery, testing the squish factor with your elbow like you're buying a mattress at a wilderness yard sale. Next comes the nest. You dig a shallow trench into the bed, just enough to tuck your body into. You line it with bark, then more leaves, then strips of moss you collected from the north side of the nearby trees. It's damp, but the friction will warm it up. You build the whole thing like a squirrel might if the squirrel had sore joints and a mild grudge against October. Then you turn your attention to your clothes. You add layers, even ones you'd rather keep dry. Your rabbit fur shoulder wrap goes around your feet. Your shirt becomes a scarf. You rub animal fat into your hands and over your cheeks to block the wind. It smells like yesterday's dinner but acts like natural Vaseline. If it's disgusting and it works, it's basically magic. Here's your historical fact. Frontiersmen often used heated rocks to survive frigid nights. They'd bury them under their bedding, warm them by the fire, or even stuff them into wool socks as makeshift foot warmers. You do the same, this time heating smaller rocks you can tuck near your hips and under your knees, places where blood flow slows and heat loss increases. You redig your Dakota fire hole, narrower this time, designed to burn low and steady without smoke. You don't want light, just heat. You let it burn down to coals, then seal the opening with bark and dirt, venting the air hole just enough to keep a trickle of warmth flowing into your shelter like a poor man's furnace. And here's your fringe fact. Some old-timers slept with their dogs for warmth. Not cute, fluffy lapdogs, but hounds bred for the trail. They'd wrap themselves around you in a heat-sharing tangle of fur and snoring. No dog for you, sadly, just rocks. But tonight, you'll pretend. Then you do something you've never done before. You warm a flat stone in the fire, wrap it in spare cloth and place it against your chest. Not your feet, not your hands, right at your core. Because keeping your body's centre warm matters more than extremities. If your core temp drops, the rest follows like dominoes made of hypothermia. The scholarly debate for the day, whether or not sleeping cold actually toughened frontiersmen over time, or just slowly wore them down. Some records describe old mountain men who claimed they could sleep in snow like a bear, while others note the long-term toll: arthritis, frostbite, fatigue that lingered for decades. The truth likely depends on your definition of survival. Getting through a night, or getting through a life. You make one last preparation, a noise trap, a tin cup with a few rocks inside tied to a string across your camp's narrow entrance. If someone tries to sneak up, you'll hear it. Or at least you'll be awake enough to wish you had. You curl into your bedding before the temperature really drops, while your body still holds some heat. You press the warm stone to your stomach, cover yourself with your bark blanket, and breathe slow, steady, shallow. And now, the secret frontier method for sleeping warm without gear. Don't sleep too deep. It's less rest, more hibernation. You hover in a half-dream state, just aware enough to wake if the cold creeps in. You shift positions, tuck your hands into your armpits, pull your knees to your chest. You become a bundle of breath and willpower. Time passes strangely in the cold, it stretches and contracts. One moment you're blinking at the stars through a crack in your shelter, the next you're jerking awake, hands stiff, back sore, your stone now lukewarm and your breath heavier than before. But you're not frozen, not dead. You made it through the night, just barely. You sit up slowly, every joint protesting, and glance at the fire pit. Still warm, the trap untouched, the trees silent and still. Your face feels raw and your lips are cracked, but you're here. Here's the thing about sleeping through cold when you shouldn't be able to. It makes you dangerous. Not because you're strong, but because you're used to it now. You've learned how to wrap yourself in bark, smoke and stubbornness. You know where to put the rocks. You know how to breathe to keep your ribs from freezing on the inhale. You didn't sleep well, but you slept smart. And out here, that's everything. You wake to silence, not the peaceful kind, not the birdsong-laced hush of early morning, or the soft drip of dew from branches. This silence is heavier, thicker, the kind that hangs in the air like breath held too long. It puts your nerves on edge instantly. You sit up slow, every sense flicking on like torches. No birds, no rustling, no breeze, just stillness. Something's off. You slip out of your bedding, careful not to snap a single twig. Your eyes scan the tree line, boots crunching just a little too loud on the frost-stiffened leaves. The air smells like wet iron and pine, a weird combination that makes you grit your teeth. You grip your knife tighter, and that's when you remember another old rule. Move like a ghost, think like a prey animal, and never assume you're alone. Because out here, the wild isn't always the only thing watching. You check your perimeter. Your trapline is untouched. No prints, no broken branches. But then you find it. A fresh mark in the dirt. Not a boot exactly, something a little broader. Could be the heel of a moccasin. Could be the sole of a boot that's seen too many seasons. Either way, not yours. Your heart picks up pace. This is where the frontiersman's mind separates itself from modern instinct. You don't panic. You don't start shouting, "Who's there?" like some doomed horror movie extra. You do what they did. You go silent, low, controlled. You backtrack to your shelter, erase your tracks with a bundled branch and stash your pack in a hollow log. Light, mobile, nothing left behind. Then you disappear. You don't walk, you drift. Just like they used to say in the old journals, if they can hear your breath, they can take it from you. And here's your historical fact. Early scouts, especially in hostile territory, practiced a level of stealth that bordered on supernatural. They moved at dawn and dusk, slept during daylight, avoided ridgelines, and always walked through cover, not beside it. A rustling leaf, a snapped twig, a startled bird, any of those could get you tracked, or worse. You loop around the area, following the scent of wood smoke. Faint, but there. Someone has a camp not far from yours. You crouch in a thicket and wait, watching the light change. Eventually you see it. The whisper of smoke curling into the sky, low, hidden, clever. Someone else knows the rules. You consider your options, engage, avoid. You don't have much to trade, and less trust to spare. So instead, you mark your territory the old way. 3 horizontal scratches on a birch tree facing their direction. A silent signal, not a threat, just awareness. It means, I know you're there. I'm not interested in trouble. Then you vanish back into the trees. Here's your fringe fact for the day. Some frontiersmen and indigenous trackers developed entire systems of silent codes made of bent grass, carved twigs, or rearranged stones. They'd leave symbols behind them like breadcrumbs for allies, or traps for enemies. Some were so subtle that only trained eyes would even notice. A snapped branch bent at a perfect 90-degree angle could mean ambush site. A broken pine cone stuffed under a rock. Double back, you're being followed. You set up a decoy camp that night. Just a small pile of kindling arranged to look like someone's been there. A few scraps of bark, a circle of stones that implies a fire pit, a twist of cloth dangling from a low branch like a forgotten glove. If someone stumbles across it, they'll think they found you. You, meanwhile, are 200 yards away in a hollowed-out pine grove, sleeping between roots like a fox in its den. The scholarly debate today: were most frontier ambushes planned or purely opportunistic? Some records say scouts and raiders would track a man for days before striking at the perfect moment, usually while cooking or cleaning a wound. Others say it was usually dumb luck. Wrong trail, wrong time, right weapon. Either way, the result was the same. One man walked away, the other didn't. You keep your knife on your chest as you lie down, not paranoia, just standard practice, yet even in sleep your ears stay alert, listening for patterns that break the night's rhythm. The wrong owl call, the wrong footsteps, anything off, but nothing comes, just wind, just time. The next morning, you check your decoy, undisturbed. You wait longer, watching from cover, no movement, no one lurking. But you don't go back, you don't collect your gear. It's written off now, burned territory. You move on. Because one of the most sacred rules of survival isn't don't get caught, it's don't stay where you've been seen. That's what frontiersmen knew. That's what kept them alive when everything else tried to take them down. You pack light, carry only what you need, and move like someone who's not waiting for danger to find them. You spend the rest of the day walking silent paths, backtracking, circling, doubling your caution. You drink from a spring under a rock shelf, eat in shadow, bury every trace. You don't light a fire. You don't speak. You become the kind of traveller that history forgets because they leave nothing behind. You don't trust shadows anymore. You don't assume the wind is just wind. And when you sleep that night, it's with your back to a rock wall and your face to the trees, just in case. Because out here, being invisible isn't just a skill. It's survival. Your feet hurt. Not the kind of hurt that goes away with a good stretch or a rest against a tree, but a deep, slow-burning ache, skin worn raw in places, bruised in others, and souls that feel like they have been sanding themselves against every root and rock in the territory. You knew long hikes were coming, especially after leaving your decoy camp behind, but you didn't count on how fast your boots would start to betray you. You sit on a mossy log and peel them off, wincing as the leather creaks and gives. The smell that comes up is impressive. You tug off your damp socks and immediately see the damage. Blisters, skin rubbed raw near the heel, dirt embedded in a cut you didn't notice yesterday. You curse under your breath, then reach for your water tin to clean the wound. You can't afford infection, not now, not with no shelter, no rest, and no plan for resupply. And that's when you realise it's time to get creative again. Time to improvise. Because out here, when things break, you don't replace them. You adapt. You look around the forest and ask it, what won't rot or run away? That's today's theme. Frontier tools made from salt, sap, bone, and sheer willpower. The ancient toolkit minus the hardware store. First, the immediate fix. You dig out your pouch of pine resin, the stuff you once used for fire starting and wound sealing. You warm a bit over your campfire coals until it softens into a sticky putty, then smear it across the worst part of your boot's seam. A patch job, ugly and tar-coloured, but waterproof. You bind it with twine made from bark fibre. Then you grab a bit of deerskin you'd salvaged from an old snare line and lash it over the toe as an improvised toe cap. Field cobbling, mountain man style. But the real genius of the frontier wasn't just repair, it was reinvention. You glance down at the rabbit bones you've been saving half out of habit, half because throwing anything useful away feels criminal out here. One of them, a long, clean femur, catches your eye. With a bit of scraping and whittling, you turn it into a narrow spoon. Not glamorous, but now you don't have to burn your fingers eating pine needle stew out of a boiling tin. Here's your historical fact. Bones were used constantly by the frontiersmen and native tribes alike. They became needles, fish hooks, buttons, even sled runners if you had enough and a good imagination. Nothing died in vain. You turn a shorter bone into a toggle for your belt, carving it into a small polished nub to tie your pouch closed without using precious twine. Next, you gather tree sap, not resin, sap. Sticky, golden, slow dripping from a fresh birch you score lightly with your knife. You smear it on a strip of bark and chew the cooled version like gum to distract yourself from your aching feet. Birch sap is slightly sweet, a poor man's candy and electrolyte source. You collect some more in a folded leaf to save for later. Then comes the salt. You haven't had salt in days, and your body knows it. You're craving it. That light-headed, twitchy feeling, that's not just exhaustion, it's depletion. So you go to the riverbank where animals come to drink, there, where the soil is chalky and white in places, so you scrape a small patch of naturally salty clay. It's not much, but when you boil it down, the water leaves behind faint white crystals. You add a pinch to your meal. Immediately your body feels it, like lighting a match in a cold room. And here's your fringe fact for the day. Some early frontiersmen chewed bones to get the last remnants of salt and marrow out of them, especially when winter dragged on. Others even burned certain types of salty plants, like goosefoot, and collected the ashes as a form of primitive seasoning. Desperate? Sure, but smart. You carry on crafting into the afternoon using sinew to restitch a rip in your shirt. Sealing cracks in your water pouch with a mix of wax and ash. You take a smooth stone and begin slowly shaping it into a sharpening tool, rubbing it against your knife at a careful angle. It's not perfect, but you can feel the edge coming back. Here comes the scholarly debate of the day. Was frontier improvisation born from survival genius or simple desperation? Some argue that necessity bred innovation. The best tools came from the worst situations. Others say we romanticize their creativity too much, that many tools were crude, inefficient, barely held together by luck and animal guts. But the point wasn't elegance, it was that they worked. You're proof of that. As evening settles in, you inventory your new gear. You've got a bone spoon, a patched boot, a salt pouch, a sap-stiffened toggle, and a needle fashioned from a rabbit rib. Your fire starter kit is half pine resin, half flint and bark. Your knife isn't sharp, but it can still skin a squirrel if you're lucky enough to find one. This isn't some fantasy survival show. There's no montage music, just you, sitting cross-legged on a muddy patch of earth, hands sticky with glue, bones and bark, feeling like a mad scientist who lives in a tree. And somehow you're proud, not because it's beautiful, not because it's easy, but because none of this should be working, and it is. You wrap your sore feet in soft moss and bind them with scraps of hide, praying it'll cushion enough to walk tomorrow. You tuck your tools in tight, like treasure. Because that's what they are now, not gear. Proof. Proof you're not just surviving, you're adapting, you're learning the language of salt and sap and stone, of bone and bark and improvisation. A language most people forgot long ago, but one your hands now speak fluently. And as the stars blink overhead and your little fire snaps quietly in the dark, you feel more prepared than you have in days. Not because you have what you need, but because you can make what you don't. You don't dream that night. Or if you do, they're the quiet kind that slip away before they form images. Just dark shapes and muted sounds and a sense of being carried, not by people, but by time. When you wake, it's with that odd, eerie calm that only arrives when your mind finally catches up to your body. You're not rested, but you're no longer running on fumes. You've crossed into something else now. Survival has become your normal. And now, as you stare into the slowly brightening sky, you realise the real challenge isn't the hunger, or the cold, or the endless list of things trying to kill you. It's your own mind, your thoughts, the silence, the waiting. the weight of every minute stretching out like thread on a fraying spool. Today is about the psychological game, the part of frontier survival no one likes to talk about. Not because it's too dark, but because it's too real. Because once you've handled the cuts, the shelter, the fire, the traps, what you're left with is yourself. And that's often the most dangerous thing in the woods. You get up, stretch, wince, and begin the day the same way you've begun every day for weeks now. But something's different. There's no urgency, no immediate need to fix or build or hide. You've outlasted the last storm, your injuries are healing, you have food, a serviceable camp, and the kind of hard-earned quiet most people crave until they actually get it. And now the real work begins, staying sane. You notice it first in your habits. You talk out loud, softly, under your breath. Not because you expect anyone to respond, but because your voice keeps you tethered to something human. You find yourself narrating the way you build your fire. You compliment your bone spoon like it's a friend. You scold a pine cone for rolling out of reach. You start assigning names to things. The tree you lean against every morning? That's Old Man Crooked. The spot by the stream where you nearly slipped and face-planted into a crawfish den? That's Ambush Alley. The raven that circles above camp every couple of days, eyeing your traps like it's owed rent? That's Black Bill, and he is definitely judging you. Here's your historical fact. Isolation on the frontier was one of the leading causes of mental collapse among early settlers. Entire cabin communities vanished or broke apart not from famine or conflict, but from boredom, loneliness, and what they used to call prairie madness. Men who went into the wild alone often didn't come back the same. Some didn't come back at all, not physically lost, but mentally untethered, living in the woods until they couldn't remember what life outside them even looked like. And here's your fringe fact. Some frontiersmen used rituals, little daily ceremonies, to keep their minds intact. They'd sharpen their knife each morning, regardless of whether it needed it. They'd carve notches in trees, build cairns for no one, write invisible letters in their heads. You understand now. These routines weren't just habits. They were anchors. So you build your own. You carve a tally stick, your version of a calendar. One notch for each day since you've arrived. Then you start grouping them. Weeks, maybe. You scratch little symbols beside the more memorable days. A tiny flame for the night you mastered your silent cooking fire. A jagged arrow for the day you saw signs of someone else. A spiral for the day you got sick and made your medicine with bark and prayer. You find yourself humming sometimes, snatches of songs you don't remember learning. You recite the names of people you haven't seen in years just to keep them real. You speak to the forest like it's listening. Not in a mystical whisper to the wind kind of way, but more like you're checking in with a neighbour. Not bad today. Fire stayed lit. Caught a squirrel. The forest never will answers, but it never leaves either. Here comes the scholarly debate. Did solitude make frontiersmen wiser or wilder? Some say the time alone honed their perception, gave them clarity, spiritual insight, deep understanding of nature and self. Others argue it stripped them of humanity, turned them strange, feral, untrustworthy. The answer isn't neat. It's not supposed to be. Both can be true. You feel it in yourself, you've become sharper. You notice the smallest shifts in the trees. You can tell when the air is changing before the clouds arrive. You sense movement around you like it's your own breath. But you've also begun forgetting what day it is, or what your own voice sounds like when it's speaking to another human. The outside world feels like a memory someone else had. You manage this balance with stories. You begin telling them, to yourself, to the fire, to the wind, little fragments at first. A tale about a ghost who wanders the woods asking animals riddles. A story about a hunter who gets cursed and can only speak in bird calls. A love story even between two rival scouts who leave each other hidden messages in pine sap. They're nonsense. They're everything. They give your mind something to chew on besides the silence. And here's something you didn't expect. The boredom is just as dangerous as the fear. Fear keeps you alive. Boredom tempts you to take risks, walk farther than you should, climb something unstable. Burn more firewood than necessary just to do something. You fight it with effort, with little projects. You whittle a spoon and then a fork, then a useless but perfectly carved wooden squirrel. His name is Reggie. He lives by your fire pit now and judges your cooking. That's fine. You need the feedback. At night, you start writing with charcoal on bark. Little messages, thoughts, even to jokes. You stash them in cracks between stones or hang them from tree branches with sinew. No one will ever read them. That's not the point. The point is, your mind is a muscle, and out here, it's the one that gets the least rest. You go to sleep that night with one ear open, and a poem in your head that you'll forget by morning. You don't mind. The frontier changes you. You expected that. You just didn't expect it to make you more yourself. You've noticed something strange about the cold lately. It doesn't feel quite as cruel as it used to. Sure, your fingers still sting when you strip bark with wet hands, and your nose still threatens to fall off during the early morning chill, but you've stopped flinching at the bite of it. It's like your body's adjusted, not just in skin and muscle, but in rhythm, in attitude. The forest doesn't feel like it's trying to kill you anymore. It just feels like it doesn't care whether you live or die, which in a weird way is comforting. It makes you focus, makes you respect it, and it makes you think about the rules out here. Unwritten ones, carved not into bark but into behaviour. The law of the woods isn't about courts or codes, it's about frontier justice and the strange brutal code of honour that govern those who survived out here. You sit by your morning fire, boiling pine tea, staring into the coals. You're not thinking about food or water or your foot, which, by the way, is finally healing. You're thinking about choices, about right and wrong when no one's watching, about how easy it is to become something you wouldn't recognise back home, and how easy it is to pretend that it's okay. Out here you've had the chance to steal, could have taken that trapper's bait, could have scavenged from that trail you found, could have followed the smoke and taken what wasn't yours, but you didn't. Not because you're some paragon of virtue, but because you're learning what the old-timers meant when they said, your name's all you own when no one else is around. Here's your historical fact. Frontier justice wasn't just about gunfights at high noon. Most of it was built on honour systems between desperate people. A man's word was often the only thing standing between trade and betrayal. Outposts and settlements had no jails, just reputations. If you were known as a cheat, you were done. No help, no trade. Sometimes no warning. It worked both ways. Thieves were sometimes dealt with swiftly, without ceremony. Horse stealing, for instance, could get you hanged on the spot. In some areas, a stolen trap was considered fair cause for a knife to the gut. No lawyers, just swift, often final decisions. Was it fair? Not always. Was it clear? Almost never. But it was understood. You recall reading a journal entry once, where a trapper described burying stolen goods to test another man's character. He left them marked, then watched from a distance. The man passed the test. They ended up partners for 2 winters, would have been dead without each other. A whole life built on a single moment of not stealing. You start carving a small totem from wood, a crude figure, maybe a bear, maybe a man. You don't really know, it's just something to do with your hands, but as you work, your mind drifts to that unseen person from the smoke trail days ago. You haven't seen them since. You never will, probably, but you still wonder, did they see your scratch marks? Did they understand? That's the core of this unspoken code. Clarity without conversation. You communicate through choices, through restraint, through whether you bury your waste properly or leave it to attract animals that could get someone else hurt, through whether you leave a trap baited or sprung, through whether you share a trail or sabotage it. Here's your fringe fact. Some frontiersmen would leave gifts for strangers, small ones, a bit of salt, a piece of cloth, a smoothed rock placed on a stump, no note, no expectation, just a gesture. A strange kind of currency that existed outside barter. It was luck insurance, a way of saying we all get desperate. Here's hoping someone helps me when I'm there. You like that idea. You take one of your handmade fish hooks, the one with the barbed edge that took forever to carve, and tuck it under a flat rock near the trailhead that leaves your camp. Someone might find it, might not, but if they do, it'll say something you'll never get to. As the sun climbs, you spot tracks nearby, deer maybe, or elk. You follow briefly, then stop, not merely because you don't want the meat, but because something feels off. Fresh tracks too close to your trail could mean other predators nearby. Could mean a person too. And that brings us to the debate of the day. Did frontier justice actually prevent conflict or just encourage it to resolve faster? Some historians argue that the system kept people in check. Everyone knew they were being watched even when alone. Others believe it made everything more violent, more impulsive, that when every disagreement was potentially fatal, civility was a luxury, not a standard. You've felt both sides now. You know what it's like to restrain yourself when taking the easier path might mean a full belly. You also know how quickly a simple choice like trusting the wrong person could lead to an ambush or worse. It's not about laws, it's about survival weighted by conscience. You eat dinner in silence, small game and wild onion cooked low over hot coals. And think about the version of yourself who walked into these woods weeks ago. That version expected to be tested by storms, starvation, exposure, but not like this, not morally, not ethically, not in the mirror. And yet here you are. You keep the fire low and tuck your carving into the crook of a tree. It's misshapen, useless, but it's yours, a marker. Something to remind you that the real line between right and wrong out here isn't written in blood. It's carved into bone, slow and deep. The wind picks up just before bed, rustling through the leaves like a warning or a lullaby. You pull your blanket tight, breathe in the scent of pine and ash, and let the weight of your decision settle over you like a second skin. Out here, no one tells you what kind of person to be, so you become the one you can sleep with. You walk different now. It's not something you decided. It just happened. Somewhere between the first sleepless nights and the fire that wouldn't catch, your body picked up a new rhythm. Each step rolls silently through your feet. Your eyes scan naturally. Your ears track shifts in wind and branches without asking permission from your brain. You're not stumbling through the woods anymore. You move like you belong here. Which is good, because this is it. The end of the line. You're either making it back or not. Today's the day you start heading towards civilization, or at least what counts for it out here. A trading outpost, a cluster of cabins, even a lone trapper's hut. Just something that says not wilderness. You pack carefully, tight and light. Your clothes are stiff with dirt and resin. Your knife is nicked, but still bites. You've got enough dried meat for 2 more days, maybe 3 if you ration. You tuck the last of your tea into your pouch and look once more at the space that's been your world for weeks. Your shelter, your smoke pit, the tree with the little carved figure you made. You don't say goodbye, you just leave. As you walk, something strange happens. Memories start to return, but not in full, just flashes. A warm room, a distant voice, the feeling of your body being clean, the sound of boots on floorboards instead of pine needles. These things seem far away, like someone else's life, like dreams you don't want to wake from, even though you're already awake. The trail isn't marked, but your gut knows where to go, downhill, east toward water, and maybe, eventually, people. The first few hours are quiet, steady. You follow deer trails, step through streams, cross between thickets like smoke on the legs. You haven't spoken all morning. Don't need to go to. Here's your historical fact. Frontiersmen who re-entered society after long periods alone were often changed in ways that made reintegration almost impossible. Some came back sharp-eyed and solemn. Others couldn't stand the noise, the closeness of people, the routines that seemed to exist for their own sake. A few returned only to head right back out into the woods, unable to fit into the shape of their old lives. You feel that already, like you've been folded into a new shape, one that won't quite lie flat in a bed or sit still at a dinner table. You think about how easy it would be to just turn back, return to your shelter, live off bone tools and fire-smoked meat. You know how to do it now. That old fear? Gone. The wild doesn't scare you anymore. But that's not the point. The point was always to survive, and surviving means coming back. By midday, the woods begin to change. Fewer thickets, more open space. Filtered as through the taller trees. You see up a worn trail, actual footprints even. Deep ones, maybe from a pack animal. That tight knot of isolation in your chest starts to loosen. You're getting close. Then a sound. Not birds, not wind. A dull thud. Repeating. Rhythmic. You freeze and crouch behind a deadfall, listening. Another thud. Then 2. Then a pause. A pattern. You shift slowly, peek through a knot in the wood. There, in the distance, is smoke. But this time it's not from your fire. It's steady. Controlled. A column rising from a stone chimney barely visible through the trees. A cabin. You pause, heart thudding. You've spent so long avoiding people, evading, hiding, moving silently like prey. Now, the idea of approaching another human feels foreign. Your first instinct is to turn away, but you don't. You walk slow, hands visible, knife sheathed. As you get closer, you notice the little things, the path swept clear of leaves, a row of rabbit traps hanging on a line, the scent of something roasting. Meat, yes, but with herbs. Luxury. And then you see them. A figure stepping out onto the porch, not armed, just watching. Neither of you says anything at first. There's no hello, no dramatic reunion, just a quiet nod. They gesture to a log by the fire pit. You sit. The The warmth of human presence is almost overwhelming. You're not even sure what your face is doing anymore. Smiling, crying, probably both. You accept the tin cup they hand you, something hot and bitter. You sip. It burns in a good way. No words are needed. They know where you've been. It's in your eyes, your smell, your silence. Maybe they've been there too. Probably. And here's your fringe fact. Some frontiersmen would adopt new names when they returned from the wild. They'd leave their old identities behind, sometimes by choice, sometimes because no one remembered who they used to be. They became myths, rumours. Shadows with names like Bear Jack or Three Finger Tom. The person they were before? Gone. The scholarly debate. Whether the frontier experience broke men or revealed them. Were they changed into something wilder, or just stripped of what was never real to begin with? Philosophers still argue. You just sit there, drinking your scorched tea, not arguing with anyone. You've lived the question, that's enough. As the sky darkens and the first stars appear, you help bring in wood for the fire. A silent agreement. You're not a guest, you're another survivor. You eat, quietly, no feast, no celebration. Just hot food, steady breathing, and a roof for once. You sleep in the corner that night near the door. Habit. The others don't question it. You still keep your knife close, even if you don't need it. When you close your eyes, there are no nightmares. Just a deep, heavy sleep that feels like coming back from the dead. You made it. Not just out of the woods, but through them. And now, here you are. Back among walls, voices, steady fire, and something like comfort. The ache in your bones has dulled, the tension in your shoulders finally released. For the first time in what feels like forever, you don't wake up scanning the tree line or checking the wind for threat. You just wake up, but survival doesn't leave quietly. You still catch yourself listening for birdsong to read the weather. You still carve small marks into wood when you think too long. You still sleep with your back to something solid and your knife tucked where your hand can find it without looking. Some habits aren't scars, they're anchors. The wilderness didn't give you some grand epiphany. It didn't whisper ancient wisdom in your ear. It didn't turn you into a hero or a villain. What it did was grind you down to the core, test your resolve, your creativity, your morality, your zbuanets, and show you what was left when comfort was gone. Turns out what was left was enough. You learned that survival isn't loud, it's quiet. It's boring, repetitive, messy, full of moments no one ever writes down. It's eating something that tastes awful because you have to. It's sitting in silence because there's no one to talk to, and still waking up the next day. It's fire and ash and doubt and grit, and it's real. So if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, maybe something in you needed this story, Hiss. Maybe you've been wondering if you could handle it, if you'd last a week, if you'd learn fast enough not to die trying. The answer? Probably not. Not at first. But that's the trick of the frontier. No one does. And yet, some still survive.